Martin Buber. Tales of the Hasidim. Book 1. The Early Masters. Introduction. 1. The purpose of this book is to introduce the reader to a world of legendary reality. I must call it legendary, for the accounts which have been handed down to us, and which I have here tried to put into fitting form, are not authentic in the sense that a chronicle is authentic. They go back to fervent human beings who set down their recollections of what they saw or thought they had seen in their fervor, and this means that they included many things which took place but were apparent only to the gaze of fervor, and others which cannot have happened and could not happen in the way they are told, but which the elated soul perceived as reality and therefore related as such. That is why I must call it reality, the reality of the experience of fervent souls, a reality born in all innocence, unalloyed by invention and whimsy. These souls did not give an account of themselves but of what stirred them, and so whatever we learn from this account is not only a fact in the psychological sense, but a fact of life as well. Something happened to rouse the soul, and it had such and such an effect. By communicating the effect, tradition also reveals its cause, the contact between those who quicken and those who are quickened, the association between the two. That is true legend, and that is its reality. The men who are the subject of these tales, the men who quicken, are the Tzadikim, a term which is usually translated by the righteous, but which actually means those who stood the test or the proven. They are the leaders of the Hasidic communities. And the men who do the telling, whose tales constitute the body of transmitted legends, the men who were quickened, are the Hasidim, the devout, or, more accurately, those who keep faith with the covenant. They are the members of such communities. This book, then, purports to express and document the association between Tzadikim and Hasidim, and should be accepted as the expression and documentation of the life of the Tzadikim with their Hasidim. 2. The core of Hasidic teachings is the concept of a life of fervor, of exalted joy. But this teaching is not a theory which can persist regardless of whether it is translated into reality. It is rather the theoretic supplement to a life which was actually lived by the Tzadikim and Hasidim, especially in the first 6 generations of the movement, of which this book treats 3 in each volume. The underlying purpose of all great religions and religious movement is to beget a life of elation, of fervor which cannot be stifled by any experience, which, therefore, must spring from a relationship to the eternal, above and beyond all individual experiences. But since the contacts a man makes with the world and with himself are frequently not calculated to rouse him to fervor, religious concepts refer him to another form of being, to a world of perfection in which his soul may also grow perfect. Compared to this state of perfect being, life on earth seems either only an antechamber or mere illusion, and the prospect of a higher life has the task of creating fervor in the face of disappointing outer and inner experiences, of creating the fervent conviction that there is such a higher life, and that it is, or can gradually become accessible to the human soul, under certain conditions beyond the bounds of earthly existence. Although faith in a life hereafter is integral to Judaism, there has always been a strong tendency to provide an earthly residence for perfection. The great messianic concept of coming perfection on earth, which everyone can actively help prepare for, could not, in spite of the power it exerted over souls, endow daily life with that constant, undaunted, and exalted joy in the now and here, which can spring only from fulfillment in the present, not from hope in a future fulfillment. This was not altered when the Kabbalistic teaching of the transmigration of souls made it possible for everyone to identify his soul with that of a person of the Messianic generation, and thus have the feeling of participating in it. Only in the Messianic movements themselves, which always were based on the belief that perfection was just on the verge of being realized, did the fervor break through and permeate all of life. When the last of these movements, the Sabbatian movement, and its after effects ended in renegacy and despair. The test for the living strength of religion had come. For here, no mere softening of sorrow, but only a life of fervent joy could aid the Jew to survive. The development of Hasidism indicates that the test was passed. The Hasidic movement did not weaken the hope in a Messiah, but it kindled both its simple and intellectual followers to joy in the world as it is, in life as it is, in every hour of life, in this world as that hour is, without dulling the prick of conscience or deadening the sense of chasm between the ideal pattern of the individual limned by his Creator and what he actually is. Hasidism shows men the way to God, who dwells with them in the midst of their uncleannesses, a way which issues forth from every temptation, even from every sin. Without lessening the strong obligation imposed by the Torah, the movement suffused all the traditional commandments with joy-bringing significance, and even set aside the walls separating the sacred and the profane, by teaching that every profane act can be rendered sacred by the manner in which it is performed. It had nothing to do with pantheism, which destroys or stunts the greatest of all values, the reciprocal relationship between the human and the divine, the reality of the I and the you, which does not cease at the rim of eternity. Hasidism did, however, make manifest the reflection of the divine, the sparks of God that glimmer in all beings and all things, and taught how to approach them, how to deal with them, how to lift and redeem them, and reconnect them with their original root. The doctrine of the Shekhinah, contained in the Talmud and expanded in the Kabbalah, of the Shekhinah as the divine presence which resides in this world, receives a new and intimate significance and applicability. If you direct the undiminished power of your fervor to God's world destiny, if you do what you must do at this moment, no matter what it may be, with your whole strength and with kavanah, with holy intent, you will bring about the union between God and Shekhinah, eternity and time. You need not be a scholar or a sage to accomplish this. All that is necessary is to have a soul united within itself and indivisibly directed to its divine goal. The world in which you live, just as it is and not otherwise, affords you that association with God, which will redeem you and whatever divine aspect of the world you have been entrusted with. And your own character, the very qualities which make you what you are, constitutes your special approach to God, your special potential use for Him. Do not be vexed at your delight in creatures and things, but do not let it shackle itself to creatures and things. Through these, press on to God. Do not rebel against your desires, but seize them and bind them to God. You shall not stifle your surging powers, but let them work at holy work, and rest a holy rest in God. All the contradictions with which the world distresses you are only that you may discover their intrinsic significance, and all the contrary trends tormenting you within yourself only wait to be exercised by your word. All innate sorrow wants only to flow into the fervor of your joy, but this joy must not be the goal toward which you strive. It will be vouchsafed you if you strive to give joy to God. Your personal joy will rise up when you want nothing but the joy of God, nothing but joy in itself. 3. But how was man, in particular the simple man, with whom the Hasidic movement is primarily concerned, to arrive at living his life in fervent joy? How, in the fires of temptation, was he to recast the evil urge into an urge for what is good? How, in the wanted fulfilling of the commandments, was he to develop the rapturous bond with the upper worlds? How, in his meeting with creatures and things, grow aware of the divine sparks hidden within them? How, through holy kavanah, illumine everyday life? We do, indeed, know that all that is necessary is to have a soul united within itself and indivisibly directed to its divine goal. But how, in the chaos of life on our earth, are we to keep the holy goal in sight? How retain unity in the midst of peril and pressure, in the midst of thousands of disappointments and delusions? And once unity is lost, how recover it? Man needs counsel and aid. He must be lifted and redeemed. And he does not need all this only in regard to his soul, For in some way or other, the domains of the soul are intertwined with the big and little cares, the griefs and despairs of life itself. And if these are not dealt with, how shall those loftier concerns be approached? A helper is needed, a helper for both body and soul, for both earthly and heavenly matters. This helper is called the Tzadik. He can heal both the ailing body and the ailing soul, for he knows how one is bound up with the other, and this knowledge gives him the power to influence both. It is he who can teach you to conduct your affairs so that your soul remains free, and he can teach you to strengthen your soul, to keep you steadfast beneath the blows of destiny. And over he takes you by the hand and guides you until you are able to venture on alone. He does not relieve you of doing what you have grown strong enough to do for yourself. He does not lighten your soul of the struggle it must wage in order to accomplish its particular task in this world. And all this also holds for the communication of the soul with God. The Tzadik must make communication with God easier for his Hasidim, but he cannot take their place. This is the teaching of the Baal Shem, and all the great Hasidim followed it. Everything else is distortion, and the signs of it appear relatively early. The Tzadik strengthens his Hasid in the hours of doubting, but he does not infiltrate him with truth. He only helps him conquer and reconquer it for himself. He develops the Hasid's own power for right prayer. He teaches him how to give the words of prayer the right direction, and he joins his own prayer to that of his disciple, and therewith lends him courage, an increase of power wings. In hours of need, he prays for his disciple and gives all of himself, but he never permits the soul of the Hasid to rely so wholly on his own that it relinquishes independent concentration and tension. In other words, that striving to God of the soul, without which life on this earth is bound to be unfulfilled. Not only in the realm of human passions does the Tzadik point over and over to the limits of counsel and help. He does this also in the realm of association with God. Again and again, he emphasizes the limits of mediation. One man can take the place of another only as far as the threshold of the inner sanctum. Both in the Hasidic teachings and in the tales, we often hear of Tzadikim who take upon themselves the sorrow of others and even atone for others by sacrificing their own lives. But on the very rare occasions, as in the case of Rabbi Naaman of Bratslav, when we read that the true Tzadik can accomplish the act of turning to God for those nearest and dearest to him, the author immediately adds that this act, done in place of the other, facilitates the Hasid's own turning to God. The Tzadik helps everyone, but he does not relieve anyone of what he must do for himself. His helping is a delivery. He even helps the Hasid through his death. Those near him in the hour of his death receive a great illumining. Within these limits, the Tzadik has the greatest possible influence not only on the faith and mind of the Hasid, but on his active everyday life, and even on his sleep, which he renders deep and pure. Through the Tzadik, all the senses of the Hasid are perfected, not through conscious directing, but through bodily nearness. The fact that the Hasid looks at the Tzadik perfects his sense of sight, his listening to him, his sense of hearing. Not the teachings of the Tzadik, but his existence constitute his effectiveness, and not so much the circumstance that he is present on extraordinary occasions, as that he is there in the ordinary course of days, unemphatic, undeliberate, unconscious. Not that he is there as an intellectual leader, but as the complete human being, with his whole worldly life, in which the completeness of the human being is tested. As a Tzadik once said, "I learned the Torah from all the limbs of my teacher." This was the Tzadik's influence on his true disciples. But his mere physical presence did not, of course, suffice to exert influence on the many, on the people at large, that influence which made Hasidism a popular movement. To achieve this, he had to work with the people until they were ready to receive what he had to give them, to present his teachings in a form the people could accept as their own. He must participate in the multitude. He had to mix with the people and, in order to raise them to the rung of what perfection they were capable of, he had to descend from his own rung. If a man falls into the mire, says the Baal Shem, and his friend wants to fetch him out, he must not hesitate to get himself a little dirty, One of the great principles of Hasidism is that the Tzadik and the people are dependent on one another. Again and again, their relationship is compared to that between substance and form in the life of the individual, between body and soul. The soul must not boast that it is more holy than the body, for only in that it has climbed down into the body and works through its limbs can the soul attain to its own perfection. The body, on the other hand, may not brag of supporting the soul, for when the soul leaves, the flesh falls into decay. Thus the Tzadikim need the multitude, and the multitude need the Tzadikim. The realities of Hasidic teaching depend on this interrelationship, and so the descending from the rung is not a true descent. Quite the contrary. If the Tzadik serves God, says Rabbi Nahman of Bratslav, but does not take the trouble to teach the multitude, he will descend from his rung, maybe aberration. Rabbi Nahman himself, one of the most spiritual of all the Tzadikim, felt a deep and secret sense of union between himself and simple men. This union is the point of departure for his strange utterances about 2 months before he died. At first, he was in a state of such spiritual exhaustion that he declared he was nothing but a simple man. But when this state suddenly went over into the loftiest elation of spirit, he said that in such periods of descending, the Tzadik was infused with vital strength, which poured out from him into all the simple men in the world, not only those of Israel, but of all people. And the vital strength which flowed into him hailed from the treasure trove of gratuitous gifts stored up in the land of Canaan from time immemorial, time before Israel. And this treasure trove, he added, consists of that secret substance which is also accorded to the souls of simple men and makes them capable of simple faith. Here we come to the very foundation of Hasidism, on which the life between those who quicken and those who are quickened is built up. The quintessence of this life is the relationship between the Tzadik and his disciples, which unfolds the interaction between the quickener and the quickened in complete clarity. The teacher helps his disciples find themselves, and in hours of desolation, the disciples help their teacher find himself again. The teacher kindles the souls of his disciples, and they surround him and light his life with the flame he has kindled. The disciple asks, and by his manner of asking unconsciously evokes a reply, which his teacher's spirit would not have produced without the stimulus of the question. 2 miracle tales will serve to demonstrate the lofty function of discipleship. Once, at the close of the Day of Atonement, the Baal Shem is greatly troubled because the moon cannot pierce the clouds, and so he cannot say the blessing of the new moon, which in this very hour, an hour when Israel is threatened with grave danger, was to have a particularly salutary effect. In vain he strains his soul to alter the state of the sky. Then his Hasidim, who know nothing of all this, begin to dance, just as every year at this time, in joyful elation at the service performed by their master, a service like that of the high priest in the temple of Jerusalem. First, they dance in the outer room of the Baal Shem's house, but in their elation, they enter his room and dance around him. At last, at the peak of ecstasy, they beg him to join the dance and draw him into the circle. And then the moon breaks through the heavy clouds and shines out, a marvel of flawless light. The joy of the Hasidim has brought about what the soul of the Tzadik, straining to the utmost of its power, was not able to effect. Among the disciples of Rabbi Dov Ber, the great Maggid, the greatest disciple of the Baal Shem, Rabbi Elimelech was the man who kept alive the core of the tradition and preserved the school as such. Once, when his soul rose up to heaven, he learned that with his holiness, he was rebuilding the ravaged altar in the sanctuary of heavenly Jerusalem, which corresponds to the sanctuary of Jerusalem on this earth. At the same time, he learned that his disciples were helping him in this task of restoration. In a certain year, 2 of these were absent from the festival of rejoicing in the law, Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak, later the Rabbi of Lublin the seer, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, later the Rabbi of Apartment Heaven, had told Elimelech that Jacob Yitzhak would bring the ark into the sanctuary and that Abraham Joshua Heschel would bring the tables of the law. Yet now they were both missing. Then the Tzadik said to his son, 18 times over I can cry, "Rise up, O Lord," as Israel, in the day of old, called toward the ark, which was to precede them into battle, and it will be of no use. In this second story, the disciples participate in the work of the Tzadik as individuals. In the first, they take part in it as a holy community. This form of collective effect is undoubtedly the more significant. Though we have many and varied tales concerning the participation of individuals, the community of Hasidim who belong to a Tzadik, especially the close-knit circle of those who are constantly with him, or at least visit him regularly, is felt as a powerful dynamic unit. The Tzadik unites with this circle both in prayer and in teaching. They are his point of departure in praying, for he does not pray merely as one speaking for them, but as their focus of strength, in which the blaze of the community soul is gathered, and from which this blaze is borne aloft, fused with the flame of his own soul. On the Sabbath, when, at the third meal, he expounds the scriptures and reveals what is hidden, his teaching is directed toward them. They are the field of force, in which his words make manifest the Spirit in expanding circles, like rings widening on the waters. And this meal itself, we can approach an understanding of its tension and bliss only when we realize that all, each giving himself utterly, are united into an elated whole, such as can only form around an elated center, which through its very being points to the divine center of all being. This is a living connection, which sometimes expresses itself strangely and even grotesquely, but the grotesque in itself is so genuine that it bears witness to the genuineness of the impulses. For Hasidism must not be interpreted as an esoteric movement, but one charged with primitive vitality, which, as all primitive vitality, sometimes vents itself rather crudely. It is this very vitality which lends peculiar intensity to the relationship of one Hasid toward another. Their common attachment to the Tzadik and to the holy life he embodies binds them to one another, not only in the festive hours of common prayer and of the common meal, but in all the hours of everyday living. In moments of elation, they drink to one another, they sing and dance together, and tell one another abstruse and comforting miracle tales, but they help one another too. They are prepared to risk their lives for a comrade, and this readiness comes from the same deep source as their elation. Everything the true Hasid does or does not do mirrors his belief that, in spite of the intolerable suffering men must endure, the heartbeat of life is holy joy, and that always and everywhere one can force a way through to that joy, provided one devotes oneself entirely to his deed. There are many distorted aspects of Hasidism which are by no means inherent only in the later stages of the movement. Side by side with the fervent love for the Tzadik, we find a coarsened form of reverence on the part of those who regard him as a great magician, as one who is an intimate of heaven and can right all that is wrong, who relieves his Hasidim of straining their own souls and secures them a desirable place in the hereafter. Though the Hasidim of a Tzadik were often united by a feeling of true brotherliness, they frequently held aloof from, and sometimes were even hostile to, the followers of other Tzadikim. A like contrast obtained between the free life in religion of a Hasidic community and their thick-skinned opportunism in regard to the powers of the state. Sometimes, dull superstition settled down side by side with the innocent fantasy of the elated spirit and made shallows of its depths, and sometimes crass fraud made its appearance and abused it. Most of these phenomena are familiar to us through the history of other religious movements that sprang from the vitality of the people. Others become understandable when we consider the pathological premises of life in exile. My aim was not to go into all this, but to show what it was that made Hasidism one of the most significant phenomena of living and fruitful faith that we know, and up to this time, the last great flowering of the Jewish will, to serve God in this world and to consecrate everyday life to Him. In the very beginnings of the movement, Hasidism disintegrated into separate communities whose inner life had small connection, and early in its history, individual Tzadikim display problematic traits. But every Hasidic community still contains a germ of the kingdom of God, a germ no more than that, but no less. and often this germ lives and grows even in substance which has fallen prey to decay. And even the Tzadik, who has squandered the spiritual inheritance of his forebears, has hours in which his forehead gives forth a glow, as though the primordial light had touched it with radiance. 4. In a crisis of faith, when faith is renewed, the man who initiates and leads the renewal is frequently not a spiritual character in the ordinary sense of the world, but one who draws his strength from an extraordinary union between the spiritual and tellurian powers, between heavenly and earthly fire. But it is the sublime which determines the earth-sustained frame. The life of such a man is a constant receiving of fire and transforming it into light. And this, which is and occurs within himself, is the cause of his twofold effect on the world. He restores to the element of earth those whom preoccupation with thought has removed from it, and those who are burdened with the weight of earth he raises to the heights of heaven. Israel, Ben Eliezer of Mezritch, called the Baal Shem Tov, 760, the founder of Hasidism, was such a man. He first appears merely as one in a series of Baal Shem, of masters of the name, who knew a name of God that had magic force, were able to invoke it, and with this art of theirs, helped and healed the men who came to them, manifestations of a form of magic which was absorbed by religion. The actual basis for their work was their ability to perceive intrinsic connections between things, connections which lay beyond the bounds of time and space, apparent only to what we usually call intuition, and their peculiar strengthening and consolidating influence on the soul center of their fellowmen, which enabled this center to regenerate the body and the whole of life, an influence of which the so-called suggestive powers are nothing but a distortion. Certain aspects of Israel ben Eliezer's work constitute a continuation of the work of the Baal Shem, but with one marked difference, which even expresses itself in the change of the epithet Baal Shem to Baal Shem Tov. This difference, and what it signifies, is unambiguously stressed in the legendary tradition. In various versions, we are told how either Rabbi Gershon, the Baal Shem's brother-in-law, who first despised him as an ignorant man but later became his faithful disciple, or one of the descendants of the Baal Shem, went to a great rabbi who lived far away in Palestine or in Germany, and he told him about Rabbi Israel Baal Shem. "Baal Shem?" said the rabbi questioningly. "I don't know any such person." And in the case of the Baal Shem's brother-in-law, the rejection is more pronounced. For when Rabbi Gershon speaks of the Baal Shem as his teacher, he receives the reply, "Baal Shem? No, there is no teacher by that name." But when Rabbi Gershon quickly writes his first words by giving the full name Baal Shem Tov, the rabbi he is visiting assumes an entirely different attitude. "Oh," he exclaims, "the Baal Shem Tov. He, to be sure, is a very great teacher. Every morning I see him in the temple of paradise." The sage refuses to have anything to do with common miracle men, but the Baal Shem Tov, that is quite another matter. That is something new. The addition of one word altered the meaning and the character of the epithet. Shem Tov is the good name. The Baal Shem Tov, the possessor of the good name, is a man who, because he is as he is, gains the confidence of his fellowmen. Baal Shem Tov, as a general designation, refers to a man in whom the people have confidence, the confidant of the people. With this, the term ceases to designate a rather doubtful vocation and comes to apply to a reliable person and, at the same time, transforms what was, after all, a category of magic into one religious in the truest sense of the word. For the term Baal Shem Tov signifies a man who lives with and for his fellowmen on the foundation of his relation to the divine. There is a story that Rabbi Yitzhak of Drohobiche, one of the ascetic Hasidim, who first rebelled against the Baal Shem, was full of hostility for the innovator because he had heard that he gave people amulets containing slips of paper inscribed with secret names of God. On the occasion of a meeting, he asked the Baal Shem about it. He opened one of the amulets and showed the questioner that on the slip there was nothing but his own name and that of his mother. Israel ben Sarah. Here the amulet has completely lost its magical attributes. It is nothing but a sign and pledge of the personal bond between the helper and the one who is given help, a bond based on trust. The Baal Shem Tov helps those who trust him. He is able to help them because they trust him. The amulet is the permanent symbol of his direct influence at the given moment. It contains his name and thus represents him. And through this pledge of personal connection, the soul of the recipient is lifted. The power at work here is the union of the Tellurian and spiritual within the Baal Shem, and proceeding from this union, the relationship between him and his Hasidim, which involves both domains. This sheds light on his attitude toward the men of spirit he wishes to win for the Hasidic movement, and on the fact that most of them are willing to subject themselves to him. According to one legendary version, for instance, the greatest of his disciples, the actual founder of the Hasidic school of teaching, Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid, wandering preacher of Mezritch, comes to him to be cured of his illness. His physical suffering is only eased, but he is healed of teaching without soul. This instance clearly demonstrates that nature, at work in the person of the helper, guides the spirit, which has strayed too far from her, back into her domain, the only milieu in which the soul can thrive through ceaseless contact with her. And the great Maggid, whose powers as thinker are far superior to those of the Baal Shem, bows to the infinitely rare and decisive phenomenon, the union of fire and light in a human being. The same holds for another important exponent of Hasidic teachings in the second generation, for Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoye. He was not an independent thinker, such as the Maggid, but well-versed in the teachings and thus enabled to receive and expound the teachings of the Baal Shem, who drew him from his ascetic remoteness into a simple life with his fellow men. There are various versions of how the Baal Shem won him over, but they all have two traits in common. He does not reveal himself directly, but manifests himself through his particular manner of concealment. And he tells him stories. He always likes to tell stories, which stir the hearer just because of their primitive character and apparent lack of intellectual quality, and finally make him see and accept them as a reference to his own secret needs. Here again, in the telling of simple stories and parables which, however, evoke a strong personal application, the connection between spirit and nature becomes manifest, a union which makes it possible for images to serve as symbols, that is, as spirit, which assumes form in nature herself. What both of these disciples have to say about the teachings of the Baal Shem and about their association with him is characteristic in the same sense. He taught the Maggid, among other things, how to understand the language of birds and trees, and so the rabbi of Polnoye tells his son-in-law it was his holy custom to converse with animals. The Gaon of Vilna, the great opponent of Hasidism, who was responsible for the ban pronounced upon it, the man who wished to proceed against the Hasidim, as Elijah proceeded against the prophets of Baal, accused the Baal Shem of having led astray the Maggid of Mezritch through his magic arts. What seemed magic was the union within a person of heavenly light and earthly fire, of spirit and nature. Whenever this union appears incarnate in human form, this person testifies with the testimony of life, for the divine unity of spirit and nature reveals this unity anew to the world of man, which again and again becomes estranged from it and evokes ecstatic joy. For true ecstasy hails neither from spirit nor from nature, but from the union of these two. 5. Not many of the immediate disciples of the Baal Shem stand in the limelight of legendary tradition. It is as though, for the time being, the power of ecstatic vision, which was his to so great a degree, narrowed and concentrated on a few persons beloved by their people, while of the others there are only isolated, though frequently very characteristic tales. Not until the third generation does the house of study of the great Maggid become the focus for a long series of Tzadikim, each entirely different from the other, whose memory legend preserved and embroidered with veneration. But aside from this, We are struck by a complete change in tone the moment we turn from the stories which concern the Baal Shem to those which deal with his disciples and are not immediately connected with his own life. The three men around whom legend has primarily crystallized, the Maggid of Mezritch, Pinhas of Koretz, and Yehiel Michal of Zlotchov, were, above all, teachers, the first as the head of the Hasidic mother school, the second in a small closed circle which developed Hasidic wisdom along its own independent lines, the third through the powerful influence he exerted in temporary contexts, wide in scope, but not followed up by continuous educational activities. Thus, in the case of these three men, legend is concerned chiefly with their teachings, while in the stories about the Baal Shem, his teachings only figure as one function, as one part of his life. In the third generation, there is a noticeable change. The tales grow more varied, more vivid. They become more like the legends of the Baal Shem. Once more, life is expressed in all its abundance, only that the secret of beginnings, the secret of primal magnitude, is lacking. Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezritch, died 1772, was a teaching thinker, or rather, the Baal Shem, who liberated him from his solitude, made a teaching thinker of him. From that time on, the task of teaching determined the deepest core of his thinking. It is significant that his favorite simile is that of the father adjusting himself to his little son, who is eager to learn. He regards the world as God's self-adjustment to his little son, man, whom he rears with tender care to enable him to grow up to his father. Here then, under the influence of basic pedagogic experience, the Kabbalistic concept of the contraction of God to make room for the creation of the world ceases to be cosmogonic and enters the realm of the anthropological. It is this idea which spurs the Maggid to try to understand the world from the viewpoint of God's educational methods. But the fundamental prerequisite for all education is the strength and tenderness of the relationship between the educator and his pupil. Only one who experienced this like Rabbi Ber could do what he did, could, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the most all-inclusive among his disciples, tells us, unite the mercy of God with man's love of God, and the sternness of God with man's fear of God. In other words, set up the reciprocity of this relationship as the fundamental principle. One must understand the tremendous seriousness the Maggid's own experience in receiving teaching had for his soul, to appreciate not only the intensity with which he handles each of his disciples according to his particular character and his inner destiny, but also what is said of his manner of teaching. We are told that his disciples had very divergent interpretations of what he had said, but that the Maggid refused to decide for one or the other of these, because no matter which of the 70 faces of the Torah one regards with a true spirit, one sees the truth. This sheds light on another aspect of the Maggid's method. When he spoke, he did not supply systematic connections, but threw out a single suggestion or a single parable without spinning it out and tying together the threads. His disciples had the task, and it was a task which absorbed them completely, of working over what had been said and supplying the missing links. Each did this for himself, or they worked together. One of them wrote in a letter, "We were always content with one saying over a long period of time, and kept it alive within us, pure and whole, until we heard another." The Maggid was concerned with waking the truth inherent in the spirit of his disciples, with lighting the candles. But we cannot grasp all this in its full significance until we remember that obviously the Maggid had always been a man given to ecstasy, only that, under the influence of the Baal Shem, this ecstasy was diverted from ascetic solitude to the active life of teaching disciples. From that moment on, his ecstasy assumed the shape of teaching. Many of his disciples have testified to the ecstatic character of his words. They say that he had only to open his lips, and they all had the impression that he was no longer in this world, that the divine presence was speaking from his throat. And this phenomenon, too, cannot be understood until we probe down to the deepest depths accessible to us. It is apparent that with all the passion his soul was capable of, The Maggid put himself into the service of the will of God to lift his little son up to him. And to accomplish this service, he regarded himself, his thinking as well as his teaching, only as a vessel for divine truth. To use his own words, he changed the something back into the nothing. From this angle, we can understand that effect on his disciples, which the youngest of them, later the seer of Lublin, described after his very first visit to the Maggid. When I came before the Master, before the Maggid, I saw him on his bed. Something was lying there, which was nothing but simple will, the will of the Most High. That was why his disciples learned even more and greater things from his sheer being than from his words. The founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem, had not been a teacher in the specific sense of the word. Compared to him, the Maggid represents the quintessence of what makes up the teacher, and that is the reason for his special influence. The Baal Shem had lived, wrought, helped, healed, prayed, preached, and taught. All this was one and the same thing. All was an organic part of unified, spontaneous life. And so teaching was only one among other natural manifestations of effective living. It was different with the Maggid. He was, of course, not a professional teacher, not a man with one specialized function. Only in eras when the world of the spirit is on the decline is teaching, even on its highest level, regarded as a profession. In epochs of flowering, disciples live with their master just as apprentices in a trade lived with theirs, and learn by being in his presence, learn many things for their work and their life, both because he wills it, or without any willing on his part. That is how it was with the disciples of the Maggid. Over and over they say that he himself as a human being was the carrier of teaching, that, in his effect on them, he was a Torah personified. As far as he himself was concerned, however, the will to teach was the mainspring of his existence. He poured into his disciples all the strength of his life, recreated by contact with the Baal Shem, and all the work of his intellect he put into the service of teaching. He did not write a book, neither had the Baal Shem. But if, unlike the Baal Shem, he permitted others to take down his words, he did this to transmit his teachings to future generations of disciples as an indestructible prop. The great Maggid did not found an institute of learning. His spirit created only disciples, generations of disciples, and disciples of disciples. No other religious movement of the modern era has produced so many and so varied independent personalities in so short a space of time. Concerning the son of the great Maggid, Rabbi Abraham, the angel, who died only a few years after him, 1776, Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz, said that had he lived longer, all the Tzadikim of his generation would have subjected themselves to him. And in the autobiography of one of his contemporaries, who, on the 9th day of Av, the commemorative day of the destruction of the temple, saw him lamenting for a night and a day, we read, "Then I realized that it was not for nothing that all called him an angel, for his was not the strength of one born of woman, but in one most significant respect, he cannot be considered a disciple of Rabbi Bears. In this one respect, he even leaves the teachings of the Baal Shem. He sets out to accomplish the change of something into nothing by returning to the way of ascetic solitude. Accordingly, he neither associates with the people at large, like the Baal Shem, nor with disciples, like the Baal Shem and the great Maggid. He gave instruction in the Kabbalah to only one person, to Shneur Zalman, a man of his own age. In the preface to his posthumous book, he refers to the fact that the true teachings of the Baal Shem and the great Maggid grew dark and material before our eyes, in contrast to the steadfastness of a superior Tzadik who cannot descend to the lowest rung to uplift his generation. Here, as in other instances, the bodily descendants of a leading Tzadik cease to transmit the teachings. As early as the second generation, the problematic character of Hasidic development becomes evident in its most sublime aspect. Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz Korzek died 1791, was the second among those who belonged to the Baal Shem circle to become the focus of a tradition. He was not one of his disciples in the strict sense of the word, since he is said to have visited the Baal Shem only twice, the second time during the last days of his life. Apparently, his contacts with Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer did not bring about any fundamental change in his views, but only confirmed and strengthened them. Yet he must certainly be included here. Although in his mention of the Baal Shem he does not designate him as his teacher, he and his school give important data about the Baal Shem and cite important utterances of his, for which we have no other source, and which therefore probably go back to oral transmission. One such utterance is the basis of one of the Rabbi Pinhas's major teachings, that we should love the evildoer and hater more, in order to compensate for the lack of the power of love he himself has caused in his place in the world. And other basic teachings of Rabbi Pinhas also derive from words of the Baal Shem. To gain a better understanding of the relationship, we must remember that the Baal Shem, as we glean from a number of indications, found kindred trends to which his influence afforded increased vitality and, frequently, a deeper rooting. Among these kindred trends, those of Rabbi Pinhas, who was about 32 when the Baal Shem died, approximated his own most nearly, and he accepted him more as a companion than as a disciple. Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, the Tzadik who wandered over the earth for secret purposes of his own, is said to have called Rabbi Pinhas the brain of the world. He was, at any rate, a true and original sage. In the period between the Baal Shem and his great-grandson Naaman of Bratslav, he has no equal in fresh and direct thinking, in daring and vivid expression. What he says often springs from a profound knowledge of the human soul, and it is always spontaneous and great-hearted. In contrast to the Baal Shem and the great Maggid, no ecstasies are reported of Rabbi Pinhas. Ecstasy wanes into the background, and the mystic teachings are reduced to the precept of constant renewal through immersion in nothingness, a doctrine of dying and arising which, however, sponsors also sturdy living in tune with all the things of this earth, and a give-and-take community with one's fellow men. Rabbi Pinhas's circle had no great influence on the outside world, but such as it is, it represents a unique and invaluable phenomenon, for its members were distinguished by the simple honesty of their personal faith, the unrhetorical telling of the teaching, a telling even tinged with humor, and by their loyal readiness to satisfy the demands put upon them at the cost of their very lives. One cannot consider Rabbi Pinhas apart from his most distinguished disciple, Raphael of Bershad. In the whole history of Hasidism, rich in fruitful relationships between master and disciple, there is no other instance of so pure a harmony, of so adequate a continuation of the work. In reading the records, we sometimes hardly know what to ascribe to Pinhas and what to Raphael, and yet we have a number of utterances of the latter which bear the stamp of independent thinking. But more important than his independence is the matter of coarse devotion with which the disciple embodied his master's teachings in his life, and according to tradition, even in his death, which quietly and solemnly sealed the proclamation of the commandment of truth, for which the master had striven so many years. Rabbi Yehiel Mikal, the Maggid of Zlotchov, died about 1786, who first learned from the Baal Shem, and after his death, from the great Maggid, was also a unique phenomenon, as yet insufficiently understood and difficult to understand. He came from a family of those ascetic mystic Hasidim whom the new movement found ready to hand and tried to win for its own, because the earnestness of their faith, which colored their whole attitude toward life, rendered them particularly valuable for the task of renewal. Michal's father was that Rabbi Yitzchak of Drohobych, who had criticized the amulets of the Baal Shem. All manner of uncanny rumors were circulated about him, that he once did a favor to the prince of the forest, for instance, or that he sent those of his newborn children who displeased him back to the upper world. It was said that Michal remained alive only because his mother refused to let his father see his face before he had promised to let him live. Rabbi Yitzhak's mother, who was called Yente, the prophetess, used to repeat the threefold, holy, of the choir of angels whose song she heard. To understand Michal, it is necessary to know his milieu. In spite of the fact that his father was close to the movement, he himself became a follower of the Baal Shem only after some hesitation. From what we are told, it is quite evident that his father's suspicion lived on in him and was only gradually overcome. But he never wholly overcame his basic asceticism. While he was still young, Michal became a great preacher, like his father before him, and went preaching from town to town. He fascinated and intimidated his audiences, although he emphasized that the reproof in his sermons was directed toward himself as well as them. The Baal Shem chided him for imposing too heavy penances on sinners and apparently induced him to adopt a milder attitude. But even after his death, they tell of souls who come to a younger Tzadik to complain of Rabbi Michal, who, as the chief justice of a court in heaven, censures unintentional earthly faults with the utmost severity because he, who remained pure, does not understand the temptations of men. Though he wholly accepted and absorbed the Hasidic teachings and followed the trend of the Baal Shem in his doctrine of the evil urge as a helper and of the uplifting of sexuality, he never quite rid himself of asceticism, whose extreme forms, however, he emphatically rejected. According to a report, which all but crosses the border between the sublime and the ridiculous, he never warmed himself at the stove, for this would have been a concession to sloth, never bent down to his food, for this would have been yielding to greed, and never scratched himself, since this would have verged on voluptuousness. But Rabbi Michal's special endowment made for true Hasidism in a very significant fashion. The most notable instance of this is that he carried on the tradition of those first Hasidim, of whom the Talmud says that they waited with praying until they had prepared the kavanah within themselves. But he expanded this motif into something that embraced the whole community. In order to make his prayer representative for the community, he strove to unite with both the mightier and the humbler to form a single, continuous, and powerful chain of prayer. And taking as his point of departure the tradition of his father and a saying of the Baal Shems, he also wanted to raise up the limp prayers which had not the strength to rise from the ground. This attitude, for which he incurred violent hostility, exerted an effective influence on later generations who accorded him deep veneration. But even a contemporary Tzadik said of him that he was a soul of the soul, and, in his own generation, played the same role as Rabbi Simeon ben Yohai, the founder of the secret teachings, in his. Like Rabbi Michal himself, 2 of his 5 sons figure in tales of strange journeys of the soul to heaven. But a third, Rabbi Zev Wolf of Zbaraj, died about 1802, who was reputed to have been a very wild child, was made of quite other stuff. Like his contemporary Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sassov, who belonged to the 4th generation, he became one of the great friends of man and the earth. In contrast to his father, though, we must not forget that Rabbi Michal bade his sons pray for their enemies. He obstinately refused to treat the wicked differently from the good. Wolf lavished his love on all human beings who came his way, and even on animals. He held that man should love all that lives, and that this love must not be determined by the way the object of his love behaves toward him. Among the disciples of Rabbi Michal was Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij, near Suchoids, died 1800, whom his teacher took with him to visit the great Maggid. He figures in a great number of miracle tales, and it is told that even demons recognized his power. The source of such a statement is actual power over the souls of men, and in the case of Rabbi Mordecai, such power definitely sprang from the unity in his own soul. This unity, however, did not find adequate expression in power itself, but rather in the unity of his own life. This is what the seer of Lublin must have meant when he said that all his activities were, in reality, one. 6. According to Hasidic tradition, the great Maggid had 300 disciples. About 40 of these have come down to us as individuals with their personal characteristics, the most of them also through their writings. 10 are represented in this volume, but as in the case of the Baal Shem's disciples, these 10 do not include all of those who were most significant as human beings. because the legends about them, current among the people, do not suffice to give a connected account of their lives. These 10 are: Menahem Mendel of Vitebsk, died 1788, whom the Maggid brought to the Baal Shem when he was a boy. Aaron of Karlin, died 1772. Shmelka of Nikolsburg, died 1778. Meshulam Zusha Yiddish Zisha of Hanipol Anapol, died 1800. His younger brother Elimelech of Lezensk-Lezaisk died 1809. Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev died 1809. Shneur Zalman of Ladi died 1813. Shalomo of Karlin died 1792. Israel of Koznitz-Kozianitze died 1814. Jacob Yitzhak of Lublin died 1815. What makes Rabbi Menahem Mendel of particular importance in the history of Hasidism is that he transplanted the movement to Palestine, where, to be sure, other Tzaddikim had settled before him. From the days of the Baal Shem, who, according to legend, had to turn back at the border, the focus of Hasidic, as of the pre-Hasidic, yearning for redemption was the land. After having taken a leading part in the struggle against those who pronounced the ban, he translated this yearning into action by going to Palestine 1777 with 300 of his Hasidim. There he first settled near Safed, the ancient city of Kabbalists, and later in Tiberias. Thus he gave the movement a site which was not central in location but in spirit, and linked it organically with the past, and he brought the land an element of new life. Concerning this, a grandson of his friend, Shneur Zalman, who had not been able to accompany Mendel to Palestine, said that once, when the land of Israel was on its highest rung, it had the power to uplift man, but that now that it had sunk so low, and strangely enough kept on sinking, it could no longer uplift man, that now man must uplift the land, and only a man on so high a rung as Rabbi Mendel had been able to do this. In a letter from Palestine, Rabbi Mendel wrote that he regarded himself as an envoy to the palace of the king, dispatched by the governors of the provinces, that he must not for a moment lose sight of both the physical and spiritual welfare of the provinces. He remained in especially close and constant contact with the Hasidim he had left behind in exile. So close that as one of those who accompanied him writes, everything connected with them, everything taking place in their hearts, was manifest to him when he prayed before falling asleep. From among all of his disciples, the Maggid chose Aaron of Karlin as his envoy, because he knew how to win souls as none other, even though his courting of them was linked with stern demands upon their whole attitude toward life. He died young, and in his funeral sermon his successor, Rabbi Shalomo of Karlin, said that the Lord had taken him before his time, because his power of converting men to God was so great that he deprived them of the freedom of choice, which is of prime importance. When the Maggid heard of his death, he said, "He was our weapon in war. What shall we do now?" Rabbi Aaron did not wish to go contrary to the folk character of the movement, which not only persisted in the Karlin school, but experienced a curious development there. Nevertheless, what he obviously wanted was to create an elite body dedicated to a life of faith. One main device by which he sought to accomplish this was the regulation of 1 day a week, devoted to solitary meditation, accompanied by fasting and the ritual bath. But this was to have nothing of the ascetic, for Rabbi Aaron regarded asceticism as a bait thrown out by Satan himself. His demands sprang from his own intrinsic experience. His testament expresses his deepest purpose for his own person, to prepare the proper kavanah for the hour in which the soul departs from the body. His friend Shneur Zalman says of him that he was a veritable fountain of the love of God, and that whoever heard him pray was seized by the love for God. But the picture becomes complete only through the words the same Tzadik said about Rabbi Aaron's great fear of God after his death. His love was only the flowering of his fear, for only through great fear, this was Rabbi Aaron's basic feeling, can one attain to great love. He who has not this fear does not love the great and terrible God himself, but only a small, convenient idol. One of the sayings of his great-grandson, who followed this trend, is, "Fear without love is something imperfect. Love without fear is nothing at all." And this world in which we live is the site where, through fear, one can attain to love, and where fear and love can fuse. That is why in another of his sayings we read, "This world is the lowest, and yet the loftiest of all." Among the disciples of the great Maggid, Rabbi Shmelki of Nikolsburg was the preacher par excellence. Not a preacher who exhorted, as Rabbi Mikkel did in his youth, but a preacher per se. The sermon was his true element because he fervently believed that words inspired by God had the power to transform, and he never gave up this belief, even in the face of disappointments. He regarded the sermon as an action which lifts the prayer of the congregation to the highest level of purity. And so, in his sermons, he repeatedly demanded two things from those who prayed. First, that with the rivers of their love they wash away all separating walls and unite to one true congregation to furnish the site for the union with God. Secondly, that they detach their prayers from individual wishes and concentrate the full force of their being on the desire that God unite with His Shekhinah. This was the spirit in which he himself prayed, and this holy intent of his lifted him to ecstasy, so that in the very midst of prayer, he abandoned the charted track of memory and custom and sang new melodies never heard before. He left his Polish congregation for Nikolsburg in Moravia, which was utterly remote from the world of Hasidism, and where a man such as he was bound to provoke constant annoyance. He exerted a profound influence on many a spirit that was still open and responsive, but the majority of those he stirred up from their usual ways did all they could to make his life in their community intolerable. We have various versions of the tale of how Rabbi Elimelech, his younger friend in the Maggid's house of study, visited him and in a coarse and pithy sermon told the burghers that they were not fit patients for so noble a doctor, that first he, Elimelech, the barber, would have to subject them to drastic treatment, and the next instant, fixing now one, now the other with his gaze, he hurled at them the full description of all their secret vices and faults. Rabbi Shmelki never could have done that, if only because the weaknesses of individuals were not of sufficient importance in his eyes. His basic attitude to all men, including his foes, was love, the vast tide of love which he preached. His house of study in Nikolsburg became one of the main centers of the movement. He exerted a great influence on his disciples and friends, and through them on countless others. In sharp contrast to Shmelka, Rabbi Meshulam Zusia, known as the Rabbi Reb Zisha, was a true man of the people. Here, in the narrow confines of an eastern ghetto, in a much later century, the Fool of God reappears, the singular character, known to us from the legends of Chinese Buddhists, from Sufis, and from the disciples of St. Francis of Assisi. Yet he may also be interpreted as the East European Jewish type of Badhan, the jester who figures chiefly at weddings, but now sublimated into something holy. He is a human being who, because of his undamaged direct relationship with God, has quitted the rules and regulations of the social order. Though he continues to participate in the life of his fellowmen, he does not sequester himself. He is only detached. His loneliness in the face of the eternal Thou is not the loneliness of the recluse, but of one who is composed and true to the world, a loneliness which includes intrinsic oneness with all living creatures. He leads his life among his fellows, detached and yet attached, regarding their faults as his own, and rejoicing in them and in all creatures in the freedom of God. But since men are so made that they cannot endure an attitude such as this, which blocks their evasion of the eternal, they are content to jeer at the fool. They make him suffer. They do not impose sharp and brief martyrdom, but lifelong sorrows, and he delights in them. Yet men are also so made that such a destiny kindles them to the most sublime love, and it was with sublime love that Rabbi Zusia was loved by the people. Rabbi Elimelech, called the Rabbi Reb Melech, was Zusia's brother and shared the wanderings of his youth. Year after year, They went on and on without a goal, making their lives an imitation of the journeying of the exiled presence of God, watching for souls wakened or ready to be wakened. But then they parted ways. Zuzia did, to be sure, settle down, but again and again he felt the urge to wander, and into his old age he continued to be a boy who whistles a song for God. Elimelech had the vocation to be a leader of men. He too knew the timeless world of ecstasy, but his clear and unerring reason taught him to protect himself against its dangers and enabled him to combine the life of the spirit with the activities of an organizer. Here again was a man who simultaneously headed the Hasidic school and the Hasidic congregation, and so Rabbi Elimelech must be considered the true successor of the great Maggid. While he did not approach him in originality of teaching, he was almost his equal in his power to build up, and even outstripped him in his intuitive knowledge of the many different types of people, their flaws and their needs, and the means to minister to these. In the legend-shaping memory of the people, he stands out as a doctor of souls, as a man who could exorcise demons, as a wonder-working counselor and guide. Levi Yitzhak, the Rav of Berdichev, the most original of the Maggid's disciples, and the one who came closest to the people, was very different from Elimelech. He was akin to Zuzia, but more of the stuff of this earth, and part and parcel of his nation. His ecstasy penetrated his strong and solid life. The transports of Rabbi Shmelka, whose devoted follower he was, passed over into him, only translated into something more substantial, as it were. In lieu of the strange new songs which broke from Rabbi Shmelka, Rabbi Yitzhak's whole body shook with uncontrollable tremors when he prayed. He liked to converse with crude and ignorant people, but even the worldliest of his words was holy and had for its purpose Yehudim, the uniting of the upper worlds. He was harsh enough when something displeased him about a man, but he was always willing to learn from others and had the greatest reverence for simplicity. Even his communings with God were colored by unvarnished intimacy. He confronted him not only as the passionate intercessor for Israel, he took him to account, made demands on him, and even ventured to hurl threats, a bitter and sublime jest which would have been blasphemy in another, but was irreproachable coming from the lips of this unique character. In his own fashion, however, he also praised God and often interrupted the flow of prescribed prayer by interpolating endearment for him. Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Rav of northern White Russia, who was called simply the Rav, or the Tanya, after the title of his main work, intended to voyage to the Holy Land together with Rabbi Mendel of Vitebsk. But Mendel asked him to turn back. Legend makes of it a command received in a dream vision, and the Rav later founded the special Lithuanian school of Hasidism, the Chabad, a term made up of the initial letters of the three upper of the 10 Sephirot, which, according to the teachings of the Kabbalah, emanated from God: Chokhmah, wisdom; Binah, intelligence; Dat, knowledge. This very name, which detaches the specifically intellectual Sephirot out of the closely linked structure, points to the principle underlying this school. Reason and intellect are to be reinstated as a way to find God. The Chabad school represents an attempt to reconcile Rabbinism with Hasidism by incorporating both in a system of thought, a method which of necessity weakens certain fundamental concepts of Hasidism. The very separating off of the spheres threatened to deprive Hasidism of its strongest base, the teaching that sparks of God are inherent in all things and creatures, in all concepts and urges, sparks which desire us to redeem them, and, linked with this teaching, the affirmation of the soul-body entity of man, provided he is able to turn all his stirrings toward God. The average man is no longer asked to transform alien thoughts. He is requested to turn away from them, and this spells his renunciation of attaining all-embracing unity. The only ones who are not forbidden contact with the powers of temptation are the superior men. Here, to be sure, the Chabad teachings connect up with certain warnings of Rabbi Ephraim of Sadilkov, the Baal Shem's grandson. But in order to give the reason of the individual its due, the Tzadik is deprived of the essential office which is his, according to the teachings of the Baal Shem, and especially of the great Maggid, the great office of cosmic helper and mediator. The things misused are discarded together with misuse itself. Yet in spite of everything, the special position of the Chabad must not be interpreted as leading to schism. For the Rav was exposed to the hostilities of the Mitnagdim, the opponents of Hasidism, no less, but even more, than the other Tzadikim of his time. The anti-Hasidic rabbis plotted against him and had him arrested again and again. He was confined in the fortress of Petersburg and subjected to lengthy cross-examination. What he was charged with were distorted teachings of the Baal Shem, whose true intent he avowed. A certain Tzadik said of the Chabad, and he was not altogether wide of the mark, that it resembled a loaded gun in the hand of a man who can aim, and who knows the target only that the fuse was lacking. But even this branch movement, with its rationalized mysticism, aided and abetted by the rational tendencies of the Lithuanian Jew, still manifests the old flight of the soul. The life of the Tzadik with his Hasidim is warmer and stronger than the chilly doctrine. And besides this, the Rav counted among his disciples distinguished men who again brought the teachings closer to the original tenets of Hasidism. Surely the Hasidic flame burned in the Rav himself. We are told of certain traits in his life which give evidence of impassioned personal religiosity, and his clinging to God is documented by his melodies, particularly those known simply as the Rabbi's melodies. Sometimes these are linked with a Kabbalistic song. At others, they revolve around Tatenu, Little Father, a name by which God is addressed. Again and again, at a feast or in solitude, the Chabad Hasidim sing them, expressing their fervor and renewing it by its expression. Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin was instructed by his fellow pupil Aaron of Karlin and later became his successor. He was a man of prayer in even a stricter sense than Levi Yitzhak, who prayed primarily in behalf of the people, while Shlomo prayed only to pray. Rabbi Shlomo, as none other, accepted as his own the Baal Shem's doctrine that before praying, man should prepare to die, because the intention of prayer demands the staking of his entire self. For him, prayer was a stupendous venture to which one must give oneself up so completely that thought beyond that point is wholly impossible, that it is impossible to imagine what could take place afterwards. From his youth on, this capacity for self-surrender made his prayer indescribably forceful. Before presenting him to the great Maggid, Rabbi Aaron told him about this youth who, on the eve of the Day of Atonement, spoke the words of the psalm, "How glorious is thy name in all the earth," in such a way that not a single one of the fallen sparks remained unlifted. There is a significant story of how some of the Hasidim of the Tanya came to see him and went into a long ecstasy over the way he recited a psalm before saying grace. The Tanya did, indeed, commend him with the words that he was a hand's breadth above the world. But it is also told that after Rabbi Mendel of Vitebsk's departure for Palestine, when a number of Hasidim thought of joining Rabbi Shlomo, the Tanya deterred them with the very same words, saying, "How can you go to him? You know he is a hand's breadth above the world." A statement which implied that while Shlomo's ecstasies were commendable, they were not beneficial. This furnishes a clue to what later happened between those two. During a crisis in the Hasidic school of Karlin, brought about mostly by the Tanya's growing power of attraction, Rabbi Shlomo conceived the idea of settling in the region of Vitebsk, which had been Rabbi Mendel's main rallying point and which was now included in the Tanya's sphere of influence, and went to him, requesting his consent to this. The Rav made 3 conditions which served to characterize both men. Rabbi Shlomo was not to look down upon the scholars. He was not to look down upon natural piety, that is, piety which lacks ecstasy, and he must no longer declare that the Tzadik has to carry the sheep, a phrase by which he designated the Tzadik's function to mediate. Shlomo accepted the 2 first conditions, but he rejected the 3rd, and thus relinquished his plan. Later he visited the Rav, and the two had a lengthy discussion, which, so the Chabad Hasidim say, could not be noted down because of its shocking character. In the period of Poland's desperate battles of 1792, in the course of which Shlomo died, he prayed for Poland, while the Tanya, just as 20 years later, during Napoleon's campaigns, prayed for Russia. According to tradition, which represents Shlomo of Karlin as a reincarnation of the first, suffering Messiah who reappears from generation to generation, he was killed in the midst of prayer by a bullet a Cossack fired, but continued his work of prayer even after his death. The great Maggid's youngest disciple, Rabbi Israel, Maggid of Mezritch, manifested a gentler, more composed form of Rabbi Shlomo's power of praying. Legend relates that the Baal Shem promised a bookbinder and his wife the birth of a son in their old age, because they had gladdened his heart by their joyful celebration of the Sabbath. The son, Rabbi Israel, was sickly all through life and often on the verge of death, but his prayers were so potent that the rows of devotees gazed at that frail form of his as though at a victorious general. When the great Maggid died, Rabbi Israel attached himself to Rabbi Shmelka after his death, to Rabbi Elimelech, and after his, to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. At the very zenith of his life and his work, he still wished to be a disciple. Whenever he cited the words of the Talmudic and later masters, he said their names with fear and trembling. On the eve of the Day of Atonement, the entire congregation, men, women, and children, used to come to his threshold and implore atonement with sobs and tears. And he himself came out to them weeping, prostrated himself in the dust, and cried, "I am more sinful than all of you." Then they wept together, and together they went to the house of prayer to say the Kol Nidre prayer. The power of living prayer, of which he once said that its function was to waken and lift the dead. Prayers radiated continually from his sickbed. People came to him from all over, Jews, peasants, and nobles, to receive his blessing, to implore his mediation, or just to look on his face. No Tzadik since the day of the Baal Shem had so many cures of the possessed placed to his credit, and legend even has him play an important role in the history of his time. He is said to have predicted Napoleon's triumph and later his defeat. The outcome of the Russian expedition is traced back to the force of Rabbi Israel's prayers. Rabbi Jacob Yitzhak of Lublin, a friend of Rabbi Israel and his fellow pupil in the school of the great Maggid and later in those of Rabbi Shmelka and Rabbi Elimelech, also took part in the cosmic struggle. He was called the seer because his intuition was even greater than that of his teacher, Rabbi Elimelech. One of his disciples said, "If I may take the liberty of saying so, even the Rabbi Reb Melech did not have the eyes of the seer of Lublin. He is the only Tzadik to whom the people accorded this by name, which is, however, used in quite another sense than in the case of the biblical prophets. The prophet is the mouthpiece of the will of God. He does not see or predict a future reality. In fact, the future concerns him only insofar as it cannot yet be grasped and beheld as reality, insofar as it is still latent in the will of God and also in the free relationship of man to this divine will, and hence is, in a certain way, dependent on the inner decision of man. The seer, in the Hasidic meaning of the word, on the other hand, sees and sees only whatever reality is present in time and space. But his seeing reaches beyond the perception of the senses, beyond the grasp of intelligence, on to what is in the process of becoming, and back into the past, which he recognizes in that and through that which is. Thus the Rabbi of Lublin could read not only character and deeds, but the origin of souls, which, according to the genealogy of souls, have their own law of propagation, and the migrations of the souls of his visitors. And he read this from their foreheads, or even from the notes of request they handed him. Countless men came to him to have their souls illumined and suffused by the light of his eyes. And his disciples felt so secure in the shelter of his radiance that, while they dwelt in its pale, they forgot the exile and thought themselves in the temple of Jerusalem. But he did not forget the exile. He was filled with ceaseless waiting for the hour of redemption, and finally initiated and played the chief part in the secret rites, which he and certain other Tzadikim, among them Israel of Koznitz, who strove against Napoleon, and Mendel of Rymanoff, who sided with Napoleon, performed with the purpose of converting the Napoleonic Wars into the pre-Messianic final battle of Gog and Magog. The three leaders in this mystic procedure all died in the course of the following year. They had forced the end. They died at its coming. The magic, which the Baal Shem had held in check, broke loose and did its work of destruction. Baruch of Mezritch died 1811. Grew up under the great Maggid's care, but lived his life remote from the master's other disciples. He was the younger of the two sons of Odel, the Baal Shem's daughter. His elder brother Ephraim, whom his grandfather had still been able to educate himself, was a quiet, sickly man. We know him almost only through the book in which he cites and interprets the teachings of the Baal Shem, and tells the legendary anecdotes about him, which, together with similar notes taken down by Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoi, form the nucleus of a legendary biography. Beyond this, the book contains a description of his dreams, in which the Baal Shem frequently appeared to him. Baruch offers us quite another picture, one that is full of contradictions and yet an integrated whole. There has been much and legitimate mention of his interest in wealth and power, his pride and love of splendor, and what we know of these qualities of his would suffice to account for his quarrels with the most prominent Tzadikim of his time, even if he had not almost always been the one to start them. And yet it would be a mistake to place him in the category of a later degenerate type of Tzadik. Many things we have from his own lips, and others told about him, prove that he led the life of a true and impassioned mystic. But his form of mystic life did not make for harmony with the world of man. It caused him to regard this world as an alien region in which he was an exile, and to consider it his duty to challenge and oppose it. His preference for the Song of Songs, which he recited with such fervor and abandon, helps us to gain insight into his soul. And no less important is the fact that he once designated God and himself as two strangers in an unknown land, two castaways who make friends with each other. But the picture of his soul, which takes shape through these characteristics, is complicated by the circumstance that Baruch liked to interpret the actions and incidents, even such as seem trivial to us, of his own life, as the symbolizing of heavenly events, and wanted others to do likewise. A little deeper probing, however, makes it clear that, in the final analysis, he was concerned with something utterly different from the desire for recognition. Apparently, he really meant what he once said, that he would rather be stricken dumb than coin fine phrases. That is to say, to talk in a manner that would please his hearer, rather than unbolt the gates of truth. By and large, we must agree with what Rabbi Israel of Rizhin, the great Maggid's great-grandson, once said about him. When a wise man went to the Rabbi Reb Baruch, he could spoon up the fear of God with a ladle, but the fool who visited him became much more of a fool. And this, of course, does not hold for this one Tzadik alone. Israel, Ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov. The Tree of Knowledge. They say that once, when all souls were gathered in Adam's soul, at the hour he stood beside the tree of knowledge, the soul of the Baal Shem Tov went away and did not eat of the fruit of the tree. The 60 Heroes. It is said that the soul of Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer refused to descend to this world below, for it dreaded the fiery serpents which flicker through every generation, and feared they would weaken its courage and destroy it. So he was given an escort of 60 heroes, like the 60 who stood around King Solomon's bed to guard him against the terrors of night, 60 souls of Tzadikim to guard his soul, and these were the disciples of the Baal Shem. The test. It is told, Rabbi Eliezer, the Baal Shem's father, lived in a village. He was so hospitable that he placed guards at the outskirts of the village and had them stop poor wayfarers and bring them to his house for food and shelter. Those in heaven rejoiced at his doing, and once they decided to try him, Satan offered to do this. But the prophet Elijah, begged to be sent in his stead. In the shape of a poor wayfarer, with knapsack and staff, he came to Rabbi Eliezer's house on a Sabbath afternoon and said the greeting. Rabbi Eliezer ignored the desecration of the Sabbath, for he did not want to mortify the man. He invited him to the meal and kept him in his house. Nor did he utter a word of reproof the next morning, when his guest took leave of him. Then the prophet revealed himself and promised him a son who would make the eyes of the people of Israel see the light. His father's words. Israel's father died while he was still a child. When he felt death drawing near, he took the boy in his arms and said, "I see that you will make my light shine out, and it is not given me to rear you to manhood. But, dear son, remember all your days that God is with you, and that because of this, you need fear nothing in all the world." Israel treasured these words in his heart. Vain attempts. After the death of Israel's father, the people looked out for the boy for the sake of Rabbi Eliezer, whose memory was dear to them, and sent his son to a Melamed. Now, Israel studied diligently enough, but always only for a few days running. Then he played truant, and they found him somewhere in the woods and alone. They ascribed this behavior to the fact that he was an orphan without proper care and supervision, and returned him to the Melamed over and over. And over and over the boy escaped to the woods, until the people despaired of ever making an honest and upright man of him. The first fight. When the boy grew up, he hired himself out as teacher's assistant. Early in the morning, he called for the children in their homes and brought them to school and the house of prayer. In a clear and moving voice, he recited to them those words of prayer which are said in chorus, such as, "Amen, let his great name be blessed forever and in all eternity." While he walked with them, he sang to them and taught them to sing with him. And when he took them home, he went by way of fields and woods. The Hasidim say that those in heaven rejoiced in these songs every morning, just as they had once rejoiced in the song of the Levites in the Temple of Jerusalem. The hours when the hosts of heaven gathered to listen to the voices of mortals were hours of grace. But Satan was there too. He knew very well that what was in the making down there would threaten his power on earth. So he entered into the body of a sorcerer who could change himself into a werewolf. Once, when Israel was walking through the woods and singing with the little ones in his care, the monster fell on them, and the children screamed and scattered in all directions. Some of them fell ill from the shock, and the parents decided to put a stop to the doings of the young school assistant. But he remembered what his father had said as he lay dying, went from house to house, promised the people to protect their children, and succeeded in persuading them to entrust them to him once more. The next time he shepherded them through the wood, he took a sound stick with him, and when the werewolf attacked again, he struck him between the eyes, so that he was killed on the instant. The following day they found the sorcerer dead in his bed. Conjuring. After this, Israel was employed as a servant in the house of study, since he had to be there day and night, but felt that heaven wished him to keep secret his fervor and intentness. He made a habit of sleeping while those in the house of study were awake, and to pray and study while they slept. But what they thought was that he slept all night and on into the day. The Hasidim tell of wonderful happenings that occurred in those days. Before the time of the Baal Shem Tov, so they say, a wonder-working man by the name of Adam lived. No one knows just where, but it was probably in the imperial city of Vienna. Like the succession of wonder-working men before him, Adam was called Baal Shem, that is, the master of the name, because he knew the secret, full name of God and could say it in such a way that with its help he was able to effect strange things, and especially to heal men in body and soul. When this man knew he was about to die, he did not know to whom to leave the age-old writings from which he had learned his secrets, the writings which had been handed down from Abraham, the patriarch. While his only son was a man both learned and devout, he was not worthy of a heritage such as this. And so Adam, in his dream, asked heaven what he should do, and was told to have the writings given to Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer in the city of Okup, who would then be 14 years old. On his deathbed, Adam entrusted his son with the errand. When his son reached Okab, he first found it difficult to believe that the servant in the house of study, who was generally regarded as a crude and ignorant boy, could be the person he was looking for. He let the boy wait on him in the house of study, observed him closely and secretly, and soon realized that Israel was hiding his true character and preoccupations from the world. Now he told him who he was, gave him the writings, and only asked that he might participate in studying them under the boy's direction. Israel consented on condition that their agreement remain secret and that he continue to serve the stranger. Adam's son rented a small house outside the city and apart from others, and the people were only too glad to give him Israel for his servant. They thought, indeed, that this devout and learned man was willing to put up with the boy only because his father had been a person of such merit. Once Rabbi Adam's son asked the boy to conjure up the prince of the Torah with the aid of the directions given in the writings, so that they might ask him to solve certain difficulties in the teachings. For a long time, Israel refused to undertake so great a venture, but in the end, he let himself be persuaded. They fasted from Sabbath to Sabbath, immersed themselves in the bath of purification, and at the close of the Sabbath fulfilled the rites prescribed. But probably because Adam's son did not fix his soul utterly on the teachings themselves, an error crept in. Instead of the prince of the Torah, the prince of fire appeared and wanted to burn up the entire town. It was only by a great effort that it was saved. After a long time, Adam's son urged the boy to make another attempt. Israel steadfastly refused to do again what was obviously displeasing to heaven. But when his companion called on him in the name of his father, who had bequeathed the miraculous writings to the boy, he consented. Again they fasted from one Sabbath to the next. Again they immersed themselves in the bath of purification and, at the close of the Sabbath, fulfilled the rites prescribed. Suddenly the boy cried out that they were condemned and would die unless they watched through the night with unflagging spiritual intentness. All night they remained standing. But when day was just dawning, Rabbi Adam's son could not fight his drowsiness any longer and fell asleep on his feet. In vain Israel tried to wake him. They buried him with great honors. His marriage. In his youth, Israel ben Eliezer was an assistant teacher in a small community not far from the city of Brody. No one knew anything much about him, but the children he taught were so eager and happy to learn that their fathers also came to like him. Presently it was bruited about that he was wise, and people came to ask his advice. When a quarrel broke out, the young teacher was asked to mediate, and this he did so well that a man against whom he decided was no less pleased than his opponent in whose favor he had spoken, and both went their ways serene and happy. At that time, a great scholar, Rabbi Gershon of Kitov, lived in Brody. His father, Rabbi Ephraim, was carrying on a lawsuit with a member of the small community whose children the Baal Shem taught. He looked up his opponent and suggested that they both go to Brody to submit their disagreement to the rabbinical court. But the other man kept telling him about the wisdom and sense of justice of the young teacher until Rabbi Ephraim agreed to put the matter up to him. When he entered his room and looked at him, he was startled, for shining from Israel's forehead, he saw a curved sign exactly like that he had seen for an instant and never forgotten, on the little forehead of his own daughter. When the midwife had shown him the newborn child, he lowered his gaze. His tongue was numb, and he could hardly utter his request. When he raised his eyes again, the sign had vanished. Israel listened, put questions, listened again, and then pronounced judgment. Soon after, the hearts of both men were at peace, and it seemed to them that shining justice itself had blazed forth from the mists of their differences. Later, Rabbi Ephraim went to the Baal Shem and asked him to take his daughter to wife. Israel consented, but insisted on two conditions: that their agreement should remain secret for the time being, and that in the contract about to be drawn up, his scholarship should not even be mentioned, that he should be designated merely by name, Israel ben Eliezer. For he added, "You want me, and not my knowledge, as a husband for your daughter." Everything was done according to his wish. When Rabbi Ephraim returned from his trip, he fell suddenly ill and died after a few hours. His son, Rabbi Gershon Kitover, came to bury him. Among his father's papers, he found the marriage contract and read that his sister had been promised to a man who had no learned title and who was not of a famous family. Not even the native town of the stranger was mentioned. He immediately informed his sister of this unheard-of arrangement, but she only replied that since this had been her father's wish, only this and nothing else could be right for her. Israel waited until he had completed his year of teaching. The fathers of his pupils did not want him to go, but he did not let them hold him back. He put aside his robe and clothed himself in a short sheepskin with a broad leather belt, such as peasants wear, and he adopted their speech and gestures. Thus he came to Brody and to Rabbi Gershon's house. There he stood in the door, on the inner threshold. The scholar, who was just comparing various interpretations of a difficult passage in the Talmud, had them give a coin to the stranger, who looked needy to him, but the man said he had something to tell him. They went into the adjoining room together, and Israel informed the rabbi that he had come to fetch his wife. In great consternation, Gershon called his sister to see the man her father had chosen for her. All she said was, "If he has commanded this, then it is God's command," and bade them prepare for the wedding. Before they went to the marriage canopy, the Baal Shem talked to his wife and revealed his secret to her, but she had to promise never to breathe a word of it, no matter what might happen. He also told her that great misery and many troubles were in store for them. She only said that all this was as it should be. After the wedding, Rabbi Gershon spent day after day trying to teach his ignorant brother-in-law the Torah, but it was impossible to get him to remember a single word of the teachings. Finally, he said to his sister, "I am ashamed of your husband. It would be a good thing for you to divorce him. If you do not want to do this, I shall buy you horses and a carriage, and you can go with him wherever you like." She was well satisfied with the second alternative. They drove until they came to a little town in the Carpathian Mountains, where the woman found a place to live. Israel went to the nearby hills, built himself a hut, and quarried clay. 2 or 3 times a week, she went to him, helped him load the clay in the wagon, took it into the town and sold it for a small sum. When Israel was hungry, he put water and flour into a little pit, kneaded the dough, and baked it in the sun. The helpful mountain. It is told, the summits of the mountains, on whose gentle slopes Israel ben Eliezer lived, are straight and steep. In hours of meditation, he liked to climb these peaks and stay at the very top for a time. Once he was so deep in ecstasy, he failed to notice that he was at the edge of an abyss and calmly lifted his foot to walk on. Instantly, a neighboring mountain leaped to the spot, pressed itself close to the other, and the Baal Shem pursued his way. With robbers, it is told, a small band of robbers who lived in the eastern section of the Carpathian Mountains and had witnessed the miraculous happenings which occurred wherever the Baal Shem showed himself, came to him and offered to take him to the land of Israel by a special route, through caves and holes under the earth, for they had heard we do not know how that was where he wanted to go. The Baal Shem was willing and ready to go with them. The way took them through a gorge filled with mud and slime. Only at the very edge there was a narrow foothold, and there they walked, step by step, holding to blocks of stone which they had rammed into the earth. The robbers went first, but when the Baal Shem wanted to follow them, he saw the flame of the sword wielded in a circle forbidding him to advance, and he turned back. Obstacles to blessing. The Baal Shem once asked his disciple, Rabbi Meir Margaliot, "Merli, do you still remember that Sabbath when you were just beginning to study the Pentateuch? The big room in your father's house was full of guests. They had lifted you up on the table, and you were reciting what you had learned?" Rabbi Meir replied, "Certainly I remember. Suddenly my mother rushed up to me and snatched me down from the table in the middle of what I was saying. My father was annoyed, but she pointed to a man standing at the door. He was dressed in a short sheepskin, such as peasants wear, and he was looking straight at me. Then all understood that she feared the evil eye. She was still pointing at the door when the man disappeared. It was I," said the Baal Shem. "In such hours, a glance can flood the soul with great light, but the fear of men builds walls to keep the light away. The first. When Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer was employed as ritual slaughterer for the village of Koshilovitz, he did not reveal himself, and no one could tell the difference between him and an ordinary butcher. Rabbi Zevi Hirsch Margaliot, the Rav of the neighboring town of Yaslovitz, had two sons, Yitzhak Dov Ber and Meir. Yitzhak was 17 at the time, his brother 11. Suddenly, each of the boys was overcome with the burning desire to visit the slaughterer in Koshilovitz. They could see neither rhyme nor reason in it, and even when they had told each other about their longing, they still did not understand it, and both felt that they could not talk about it either to their father nor to anyone else. One day they stole out of the house and went to the Baal Shem. What was said at this visit, neither he nor they ever told. They stayed with the Baal Shem. At home, they were missed. People looked for them all over the town and in the entire region. In Koshilovitz, too, they went from house to house until the boys were found and taken home. For the first few days, their father was so happy to have them back that he did not question them. Finally, he asked them quietly what was so remarkable about the slaughterer in Koshilovitz. "It is impossible to describe," they replied, "but you can believe us that he is wiser than all the world and more devout than all the world." Later, when the Baal Shem became known, they attached themselves to him and went to see him every year. Shaul and Ivan. It is told, once when Rabbi Meir Margaliot, the author of the book Illuminator of the Paths, was visiting the Baal Shem with his 7-year-old son, his host asked him to leave the boy for a time. Little Shaul remained in the house of the Baal Shem Tov. Soon after, the Baal Shem took him and his disciples on a journey. He had the carriage stop in front of a village inn and entered with his companions and the boy. Inside, they were playing the fiddle, and peasant men and women were dancing. "Your fiddler is no good," the Baal Shem said to the peasants. "Let my boy here sing you a dance song, and then you will be able to dance much better." The peasants were willing. The boy was stood on the table, and in his silvery voice sang a Hasidic dance song without words that went straight to the feet of the villagers. In a reel of wild happiness, they danced around the table. Then one of them, a young fellow, stepped forward from among them and asked the boy, "What is your name?" "Shaul," he said. "Go on singing," the peasant cried. The boy started another song, and the peasant faced him and danced in time to the tune. But in the midst of his wild leaps and bounds, he repeated over and over in charmed tones, "You, Shaul, and I, Ivan. You, Shaul, and I, Ivan." After the dance, the peasants treated the Baal Shem and his disciples to vodka, and they drank together. About 30 years later, Rabbi Shaul, who had become both a wealthy merchant and a Talmud scholar of sorts, was traveling through the country on business. Suddenly, robbers attacked him, took his money, and wanted to kill him. When he begged them to have pity on him, they took him to their chieftain. He gave Rabbi Shaul a long, penetrating look. Finally, he asked, "What is your name?" "Shaul," said the other. "You, Shaul, and I, Ivan," said the robber chief. He told his men to return Shaul's money and take him back to his carriage. The peasant at the stream. It is told, when Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer lived in the village of Koshilovitz, he frequently bathed in the stream. When it was covered with ice, he hacked an opening and dipped down into the water hole. A peasant whose hut was near the stream once saw him wrenching at his foot, which had gotten stuck in the ice, until the skin came off and blood spurted out. After that, the peasant watched the weather and put down straw for the Baal Shem to step on. Once, he asked the peasant, "What would you like best, to get rich, to die old, or to be mayor?" "Rabbi," said the peasant, "that all sounds pretty good." The Baal Shem had him build a bathhouse beside the stream. Soon it became known that the peasant's sick wife had bathed in the water of the stream and recovered from her ailment. The fame of the healing waters spread more and more until the doctors heard of it and made such a to-do about it in government quarters that the bathhouse was closed. But in the meantime, the peasant who lived near the stream had become rich, and the people had chosen him for their mayor. He bathed in the stream every day and grew very old. Fasting. When Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk once said that fasting was no longer service, they asked him, "Did not the Baal Shem Tov fast very often?" "When the Baal Shem Tov was young," he replied, "he used to take 6 loaves of bread and a pitcher of water at the close of the Sabbath, when he went into seclusion for the entire week. On a Friday, when he was ready to go home and about to lift his sack from the ground, he noticed that it was heavy, opened it, and found all the loaves still in it. He was very much surprised. Fasting such as this is allowed. The tap at the window is less than #0. 5# is greater than. It happened in the days of the Baal Shem's youth, that one Friday he had nothing at all in the house to prepare for the Sabbath, not a crumb, not a penny. So early in the morning, he tapped at the window of a well-to-do man, said, 'There is someone who has nothing for the Sabbath,' and walked on. The man, who did not know the Baal Shem, ran after him and asked, 'If you need help, why do you run away?' The Baal Shem laughed and replied, 'We know from the Gemara that every man is born with his livelihood.' Now, of course, the heavier the load of one's sins, the greater effort one must make to get the appointed livelihood to come. But this morning I felt scarcely any weight on my shoulders. Still, there was enough to make me do a little something, and that is what I just did." The call. When heaven revealed to the Baal Shem that he was to be the leader of Israel, he went to his wife and said to her, "You must know that I have been appointed to be the leader of Israel." She answered, "What shall we do?" He said, "We must fast." So they fasted for 3 nights and 3 days without a break, and 1 day and 1 night they lay on the earth with outstretched hands and feet. On the 3rd day, toward evening, the Baal Shem heard a call from above, "My son, rise and lead the people." He rose and said, "If it is the will of God that I be their leader, I must take this burden upon myself." The Baal Shem reveals himself. It is told, Israel ben Eliezer had held successively the posts of school assistant, servant in the house of study, teacher of children, and ritual slaughterer, and for a time he acted as driver for his brother-in-law. Finally, this man rented a piece of land for him in a village on the Prut River. On the land was an inn, which also had rooms for guests. A short distance away, across the ford, a cave had been hewn into the side of a mountain. There the Baal Shem spent the week sunk in meditation. Whenever a guest came to the inn, Israel's wife went to the door and called over to him, and he always responded, and immediately came to wait on the guest. On the Sabbath, he stayed at home and wore the white Sabbath robe. One day, it was on a Tuesday, a disciple of Rabbi Gershon's, the Baal Shem's brother-in-law, was on the way to his teacher who lived in the town of Brody. He passed through the village on the Prut, stopped, and went into the inn. Then the woman called to her husband, and the Baal Shem came and served the guest his meal. When he had finished eating, he said, "Israel, harness the horses. I have to go on." The Baal Shem harnessed the horses, reported that the carriage was ready, and added, "But how about staying here over the Sabbath?" The guest smiled at this foolish suggestion. But hardly had he driven half a mile when a wheel broke. He found that it would be some time before it could be fixed, and so he had to go back and spend the night at the inn. The next day, and the next after that, and even on Friday morning, one obstacle after another presented itself, and finally he had no choice but to stay for the Sabbath. On Friday morning he went about troubled and sad. To his astonishment, he saw that the innkeeper's wife was baking 12 Sabbath loaves. He asked her what she needed them for. "Well," she said, "my husband is, to be sure, an ignorant man, but he does the right thing, and I do in my husband's house what I saw done in my brother's." "Perhaps you also have a bath for the purification?" he asked. "Certainly," she said, "we have such a bath. But what do you need the bath for?" he continued. "Well," she said, "my husband is, to be sure, an ignorant man, but he does the right thing, and so he immerses himself in the bath every day." In the afternoon, when the time for prayer was come, he asked the woman where her husband was. "Out in the field with the sheep and cows," she said. So the guest had to say the afternoon and evening prayer, and the words to receive the Sabbath, alone. And still, the innkeeper did not come, for he was praying in his cave. When he finally returned to the house, he again assumed the speech and gestures of a peasant and greeted his guest in this manner. "So you see," he said, "you are spending the Sabbath here after all." He stood up against the wall as if to pray, and then, in order not to give himself away by the fervor he knew he could not conceal, he asked his guest to pronounce the benediction over the wine. They sat down and ate together. When they had finished their meal, the Baal Shem asked the guest to say words of teaching. In order not to tax the mental powers of his host too greatly, Rabbi Gershon's disciple merely gave a brief and dry account of the chapter for the week of the enslavement in Egypt of the children of Israel. That very night, the last before the day the Baal Shem would complete the 36th year of his life, heaven sent him a message that the time for concealment was over. In the middle of the night, the guest woke up, and from his bed in the main room of the inn, saw a great fire burning in the hearth. He ran there because he thought the logs had caught fire. But then he saw that what he had taken for fire was a great light. A great white light shone out from the hearth and filled the house. The man started backward and fainted. When the Baal Shem had restored him to consciousness, he said, "A man should not look upon what is not granted to him." In the morning, the Baal Shem went into his cave in his white Sabbath robe, came home, head held high, went about in the house, his face shining, and sang, "I shall prepare the meal on the Sabbath morning." Then he spoke the great Kiddush in his usual manner, with miraculous power of clinging to God. At table, he again asked his guest to say words of the teaching, but he was so confused that all he could utter was a few words interpreting a passage in the scriptures. "I heard another expounding of that," said the Baal Shem. Together they said the afternoon prayer, and then the Baal Shem spoke words of teaching and revealed secrets of the teachings which no one had ever heard before. Then they said the evening prayer together and pronounced the benediction which marks the separation between the Sabbath and the workaday week. When Rabbi Gershon's disciple reached Brody, he went to the community of the great Hasidim in that town even before visiting his teacher, told what had happened to him, and added, "A great light dwells close to you. It would be no more than right that you go and bring it into the city." They went and met the Baal Shem at the edge of the woods which skirts the village. They wove a seat of green withes for him, set him upon it, took it on their shoulders, and he spoke words of teaching to them. Themselves. The Baal Shem said, "We say, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, and not God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For Isaac and Jacob did not base their work on the searching and service of Abraham. They themselves searched for the unity of the Maker and his service. The Torah is perfect." Concerning the verse of the Psalm, "The law of the Lord is perfect," the Baal Shem said, "It is still quite perfect. No one has touched it as yet, not a whit and not a jot of it. Up to this hour, it is still quite perfect." The form. The Hasidim tell Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezritch, once begged heaven to show him a man whose every limb and every fiber was holy. Then they showed him the form of the Baal Shem Tov, and it was all of fire. There was no shred of substance in it. It was nothing but flame. Trembling. 1. On a certain day of the new moon, the Baal Shem joined in the morning prayer, standing in his own place, for it was his custom to go to the reader's pulpit only when the reading of the Psalms began. Suddenly he trembled, and the trembling grew greater and greater. They had seen this happen before while he prayed, but it had never been more than a slight quiver running through his body. Now he was violently shaken. When the reader had ended, and the Baal Shem was to go to the desk in his stead, they saw him stand in his place and tremble violently. One of his disciples went up to him and looked him in the face. It was burning like a torch, and his eyes were wide open and staring like those of a dying man. Another disciple joined the first. They took him by the hands and led him to the desk. He stood in front of it and trembled. Trembling, he recited the Psalms, and after he had said the Kaddish, he remained standing and trembled for a good while, and they had to wait with reading the scriptures until his trembling had left him. 2. The Maggid of Mezritch told, once it was on a holiday, the Baal Shem was praying in front of the desk, with great fervor and in a very loud voice. Because I was ill, it was too much for me, and I had to go into the small room and pray there alone. Before the festival service, the Baal Shem came into the small room to put on his robe. When I looked at him, I saw that he was not in this world. Now, as he was putting on his robe, it wrinkled at the shoulders, and I put my hand on it to smooth out the folds. But hardly had I touched it when I began to tremble. I held fast to the table, but the table began to tremble too. The Baal Shem had already gone into the big hall, but I stood there and begged God to take the trembling from me. 3. Rabbi Jacob Joseph of Polnoye told, once a large water trough stood in the room in which the Baal Shem was praying. I saw the water in the trough tremble and sway until he had finished. Another disciple told, once, on a journey, the Baal Shem was praying at the east wall of a house, at whose west wall stood open barrels filled with grain. Then I saw that the grain in the barrels was trembling. When the Sabbath drew near, the disciples of a Tzadik, who had been a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, were sitting together at noon, before the Sabbath, and telling one another about the miraculous deeds of the Baal Shem. The Tzadik, who was seated in his room which adjoined theirs, heard them. He opened the door and said, what is the sense of telling miracle tales? Tell one another of his fear of God. Every week, on the day before the Sabbath, around the hour of noon, his heart began to beat so loudly that all of us who were with him could hear it. The fringes. A Tzadik told, the fringes of the prayer robe of the holy Baal Shem Tov had their own life and their own soul. They could move even when his body did not move. For through the holiness of his doing, the holy Baal Shem Tov had drawn into them life and soul. To his body. The Baal Shem said to his body, I am surprised, body, that you have not crumbled to bits for fear of your Maker. For you. In the midst of praying, the Baal Shem once said the words in the Song of Songs, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. And he added, whatever is in me, everything, new and old, for you alone. They asked him about this, saying, but the rabbi tells words of teaching to us too. He answered, as when the barrel overflows. What the mouth will. The Baal Shem said, when I weld my spirit to God, I let my mouth say what it will, for then all my words are bound to their root in heaven. How Ahijah taught him is less than #0. 5 is greater than, the Rav of Polnoy told. At first the Baal Shem Tov did not know how to talk to people. So wholly did he cling and cleave to God, and he talked softly to himself. Then his God-sent teacher Ahijah, the prophet, came and taught him which verses of the Psalms to say every day to gain the ability of talking to people without disrupting his clinging to God. The money that stayed in the house. Never did the Baal Shem keep money in his house overnight. When he returned from a journey, he paid all the debts which had accumulated in his absence and distributed whatever he had left among the needy. Once he brought a large amount of money back from a journey, paid his debts, and gave the rest away. But in the meantime, his wife had taken a little of the money so that she might not have to buy on credit for a few days. In the evening, the Baal Shem felt something impeding his prayer. He went home and said, who took of the money? His wife confessed it was she who had done so. He took the money from her and had it distributed among the poor that very evening. Knowledge. The Baal Shem said, when I reach a high rung of knowledge, I know that not a single letter of the teachings is within me, and that I have not taken a single step in the service of God. The bath of immersion. The Baal Shem said, I owe everything to the bath. To immerse oneself is better than to mortify the flesh. Mortifying the flesh weakens the strength you need for devotions and teaching. The bath of immersion heightens this strength. against mortification of the flesh is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Rabbi Baruch, the Baal Shem's grandson, told. They once asked my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, what is the essence of service? We know that in former times, men of deeds lived who fasted from one Sabbath to the next. But you have done away with this, for you said that whoever mortifies his flesh will have to render account as a sinner because he has tormented his soul. So do tell us, what is the essence of service? The Baal Shem Tov replied, I have come into this world to point another way, namely, that man should try to attain to 3 loves, the love of God, the love of Israel, and the love of the Torah. It is not necessary to mortify the flesh without the coming world. Once the spirit of the Baal Shem was so oppressed that it seemed to him he would have no part in the coming world. Then he said to himself, if I love God, what need have I of a coming world? The dance of the Hasidim. At the festival of Simchat Torah, the day of rejoicing in the law, the Baal Shem's disciples made merry in his house. They danced and drank and had more and more wine brought up from the cellar. After some hours, the Baal Shem's wife went to his room and said, if they don't stop drinking, we soon won't have any wine left for the rites of the Sabbath, for Kiddush and Havdalah. He laughed and replied, you are right, so go and tell them to stop. When she opened the door to the big room, this is what she saw. The disciples were dancing around in a circle, and around the dancing circle twined a blazing ring of blue fire. Then she herself took a jug in her right hand and a jug in her left, and motioning the servant away went into the cellar. Soon after, she returned with the vessels full to the brim. The master dances too. One Simchat Torah evening, the Baal Shem himself danced together with his congregation. He took the scroll of the Torah in his hand and danced with it. Then he laid the scroll aside and danced without it. At this moment, one of his disciples, who was intimately acquainted with his gestures, said to his companions, now our master has laid aside the visible, dimensional teachings and has taken the spiritual teachings unto himself. The deaf man. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim, the Baal Shem's grandson, told, I heard this from my grandfather. Once a fiddler played so sweetly that all who heard him began to dance, and whoever came near enough to hear joined in the dance. Then a deaf man, who knew nothing of music, happened along, and to him all he saw seemed the action of madmen, senseless and in bad taste. The strength of community. It is told, once, on the evening after the Day of Atonement, the moon was hidden behind the clouds, and the Baal Shem could not go out to say the blessing of the new moon. This weighed heavily on his spirit, for now, as often before, he felt that destiny too great to be gauged depended on the work of his lips. In vain he concentrated his intrinsic power on the light of the wandering star to help it throw off the heavy sheath. Whenever he sent someone out, he was told that the clouds had grown even more lowering. Finally, he gave up hope. In the meantime, the Hasidim, who knew nothing of the Baal Shem's grief, had gathered in the front room of the house and begun to dance. For on this evening, that was their way of celebrating with festal joy the atonement for the year, brought about by the Tzadik's priestly service. When their holy delight mounted higher and higher, they invaded the Baal Shem's chamber, still dancing. Overwhelmed by their own frenzy of happiness, they took him by the hands as he sat there sunk in gloom and drew him into the round. At this moment, someone called outside. The night had suddenly grown light. In greater radiance than ever before, the moon curved on a flawless sky. The bird nest. Once the Baal Shem stood in the house of prayer and prayed for a very long time. All his disciples had finished praying, but he continued without paying any attention to them. They waited for him a good while, and then they went home. After several hours, when they had attended to their various duties, they returned to the house of prayer and found him still deep in prayer. Later he said to them, by going away and leaving me alone, you dealt me a painful separation. I shall tell you a parable. You know that there are birds of passage who fly to warm countries in the autumn. Well, The people in one of those lands once saw a glorious, many-colored bird in the midst of a flock which was journeying through the sky. The eyes of man had never seen a bird so beautiful. He alighted in the top of the tallest tree and nested in the leaves. When the king of the country heard of it, he bade them fetch down the bird with his nest. He ordered a number of men to make a ladder up the tree. One was to stand on the other's shoulders until it was possible to reach up high enough to take the nest. It took a long time to build this living ladder. Those who stood nearest the ground lost patience, shook themselves free, and everything collapsed. It's Tam. The address. Every evening after prayer, the Baal Shem went to his room. 2 candles were set in front of him, and the mysterious book of creation put on the table among other books. Then all those who needed his counsel were admitted in a body, and he spoke with them until the 11th hour. One evening, when the people left, one of them said to the man beside him how much good the words the Baal Shem had directed to him had done him. But the other told him not to talk such nonsense, that they had entered the room together, and from that moment on the master had spoken to no one except himself. A third, who heard this, joined in the conversation with a smile, saying how curious that both were mistaken, for the rabbi had carried on an intimate conversation with him the entire evening. Then a fourth and a fifth made the same claim, and finally all began to talk at once and tell what they had experienced. But the next instant, they all fell silent. Faith. Rabbi David Likas, a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, once asked some Hasidim of his son-in-law, Rabbi Motel of Chernobyl, who had come to meet him on his way to the town of Chernobyl. "Who are you?" They said, "We are Hasidim of Rabbi Motel of Chernobyl." But he went on questioning them. "Have you perfect faith in your teacher?" They did not answer, for who would dare to say he had perfect faith? "Then I shall tell you," he said, "what faith is. One Sabbath, the third meal, as so often happens, went on into the night. Then we said grace and remained standing and said the evening prayer and made Havdalah and at once sat down to the escort of the Sabbath. Now we were all poor and had not a penny of our own, especially on the Sabbath. And yet when the meal was over and the holy Baal Shem Tov said to me, 'David, give something for mead,' I put my hand in my pocket, although I knew I had nothing in it, but I drew out a golden and gave it for mead." The storyteller. There are many versions of how the Baal Shem gained for his disciple, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, later the Rav of Polnoy, who subsequently set down the teachings of his master in many a book. These versions include tales of miracles, even the awakening of the dead. I shall here give an account taken from other stories which supplement one another. When Rabbi Jacob Joseph was still a Rav in Carigrad and bitterly averse to the Hasidic way, a man whom no one knew came to his town one summer morning, at the hour when the cattle were taken to pasture, and stopped in the marketplace with his wagon. He called to the first man who came along leading his cow and began to tell him a story, which pleased his listener so well that he could not break away. A second man caught a few words in passing. He wanted to go on and could not, so he stayed and listened. Soon, a whole group of people were gathered about the storyteller, and still their number grew. Right among them stood the servant of the house of prayer who had been on his way to open the doors, for in summer the Rav always prayed there at 8 o'clock and the doors had to be opened well ahead of that time, around 7. Now, at 8, the Rav came to the house of prayer and found it locked. It is well known that he was very particular and quick to fly into a temper. Now, too, he angrily set out to look for the servant. But there he was, right in front of him. For the Baal Shem, it was he who was telling the stories, had signed to him to go, and he had run to open the house of prayer. The Rav shouted at him and asked why he had failed in his duty and why the men who were usually there by that time had not come. The servant replied that, like himself, all those who had been on the way to the house of prayer had been irresistibly captivated by the great story. The angry Rav had to say the morning prayer alone. But then he told the servant to go to the marketplace and fetch the stranger. "I'll have him beaten up," he cried. In the meantime, the Baal Shem had finished his story and gone to the inn. There the servant of the house of prayer found him and delivered his message. The Baal Shem immediately followed him out, smoking his pipe, and in this manner came before the Rav. "What do you think you are doing?" shouted the Rav. "Keeping people from prayer." "Rabbi," said the Baal Shem calmly, "it does not become you to fly into a rage. Rather, let me tell you a story." "What do you think you are doing?" was what the Rav wanted to repeat, and then he looked at the man closely for the first time. It is true that he immediately turned his eyes away. Nevertheless, the words he had been about to say stuck in his throat. The Baal Shem had begun his story, and the Rav had to listen like all the others. "Once I drove cross-country with 3 horses," said the Baal Shem, "a bay, a piebald, and a white horse, and not one of the 3 could neigh. Then I met a peasant coming toward me, and he called, 'Slacken the reins.' So I slackened the reins, and then all 3 horses began to neigh." The Rav could say nothing for emotion. "3, the Baal Shem repeated. "Bay, piebald, and white did not neigh. The peasant knew what to do. Slackened reins, and they neighed." The Rav bowed his head in silence. "The peasant gave good advice," said the Baal Shem. "Do you understand?" "I understand, Rabbi," answered the Rav, and burst into tears. He wept and knew that up to this time he had not known what it was to weep. "You must be uplifted," said the Baal Shem. The Rav looked up to him and saw that he was no longer there. Every month Rabbi Jacob Joseph fasted 1 week, from Sabbath to Sabbath. Since he always took his meals in his room, no one knew this except his niece who brought him his food. In the month which followed his meeting with the Baal Shem, he fasted as always, because it never occurred to him that the uplifting predicted for him could be attained without mortifying the flesh. The Baal Shem was on another one of his journeys when he suddenly felt, if the Rav of Tsarigrad continues as he is doing, he will lose his mind. He had the horses urged on so vehemently that one fell and broke a leg. When he entered the Rav's room, he said, "My white horse fell because I was in such a hurry to get here. Things cannot go on in this way. Have some food brought for yourself." The Rav had food brought and ate. "Your work," said the Baal Shem, "is one of sorrow and gloom. The divine presence does not hover over gloom, but over joy in the commandments." The month after this, the Rav was sitting over a book in Mezritch in the klaus of the Baal Shem, when a man entered and immediately began to converse with him. "Where are you from?" he asked. "From Tsarigrad," answered the Rav. "And what do you do for a living?" The man continued. "I am Rav in the city," said Rabbi Jacob Joseph. "And how do you make out?" the other went on to ask. "Do you make a good living, or are you strapped for money?" The Rav could no longer endure this empty talk. "You are keeping me from my studies," he said impatiently. "If you fly into a temper," said the other, "you curtail God in making his living." "I do not understand what you mean," said the Rav. "Well," said the man, "everyone makes his living in the place God has appointed for him. But what is the livelihood of God? It is written, 'And thou, Holy One, art enthroned upon the praises of Israel.' That is God's living. If 2 Jews come together, and one asks the other how he makes his living, he answers, 'Praise be to God, I make my living thus and so,' and his praise is the living of God. But you, who do not talk to anyone, you who only want to study, are curtailing God's living." The Rav was taken aback. He wanted to reply, but the man had vanished. The Rav went back to his book, but he could not study. He shut the book and went into the Baal Shem's room. "Well, Rav of Tsarigrad," he said smilingly, "Elijah got the best of you after all, didn't he?" When the Rav had returned to his home, he invited the congregation to the 3rd Sabbath meal, as was the custom among the Hasidim. Some came, but most of them were annoyed that he had joined that juggler of a Hasid. They grew more and more hostile to him until they finally succeeded in driving him out of town. At the last, they would not suffer him to remain in his house for even a day longer. And, since it was a Friday, he had to spend the Sabbath in a village nearby. The Baal Shem was on a journey with some of his intimate friends, and on that very Friday, he was close to that village. "Let us keep the Sabbath together with the Rav of Tsarogrod and gladden his heart," he said. And that was what they did. Soon afterward, Rabbi Jacob Joseph became Rav in the city of Rashkov. He issued a proclamation far and wide that he would return all fines he had ever received, and there had been many. He did not rest until he had distributed all the money he had. From that time on, he used to say, "Worry and gloom are the roots of all the powers of evil." The 70 languages. Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, the hidden Tzadik, told, "Once I was with the Baal Shem Tov over the Sabbath. Toward evening, his great disciples gathered around the table before the third meal and waited for his coming. And while waiting, they discussed a passage in the Talmud about which they wanted to ask him. It was this: Gabriel came and taught Joseph 70 languages. They could not understand this, for does not every language consist of countless words? Then, how could the mind of one man grasp them all in a single night, as the passage implied? The disciples decided that Rabbi Gershon of Kitov, the Baal Shem's brother-in-law, should be the one to ask him. When he came and seated himself at the head of the table, Rabbi Gershon put the question. The Baal Shem began to say words of teaching, but what he said seemed to have nothing to do with the subject of the question, and his disciples could not glean an answer from his words. But suddenly, something unheard of and incredible happened. In the middle of the Baal Shem's address, Rabbi Jacob Joseph rapped on the table and called out, "Turkish," and after a while, "Tartar," and after another interval, "Greek," and so on, one language after another. Gradually, his companions understood, from the master's speech, which was apparently concerned with quite different things, he had come to know the source and the character of every single language. And he who teaches you the source and character of a language has taught you the language itself. The battle against Amalek. Once Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz felt confused about his faith in God and could think of no way to help himself except to travel to the Baal Shem. Then he heard that the master had just arrived in Koretz. Full of happiness, he ran to the inn. There he found a number of Hasidim gathered about the Baal Shem Tov, and he was expounding to them the verse in the scriptures in which the hands Moses held up in the hour of the struggle against Amalek are spoken of as being emunah, that is, trusting and believing. "It sometimes happens," said the Baal Shem, "that a man grows confused about his faith. The remedy for this is to implore God to strengthen his faith. For the real harm Amalek inflicted on Israel was to chill their belief in God through successful attack. That was why Moses taught them to implore God to strengthen their faith by stretching to heaven his hands, which were, in themselves, like trust and faith. And this is the only thing that matters in the hour of struggle against the power of evil." Rabbi Pinhas heard, and his hearing of it was in itself a prayer. And in the very act of this prayer, he felt his faith grow strong. The passage of reproof. When Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl was young, he once happened to be with the Baal Shem, the Sabbath, on which the great passage of reproof is read from the scriptures, and which goes by the name of the Sabbath of Blessings, in order to avoid using the ominous words. On this occasion, he was called to the reading of the Torah in the house of prayer, and it was this very passage of reproof he was to assist with. He was annoyed that just this chapter had fallen to his share. The Baal Shem himself read aloud. Now Rabbi Nahum was sickly and plagued with all manner of aches and pains. But when the Baal Shem began to read, Rabbi Nahum felt pain leave one of his limbs after another, with each successive part of the passage of reproof. And when the reading was over, he was rid of all his complaints, sound and well. Losing the way. Rabbi Yehiel Mikal, later the Maggid of Mezritch, did, indeed, seek out the Baal Shem while he was quite young, but was not sure whether or not he should become his disciple. Then the Tzadik took him with him on a journey to a certain place. When they had been driving for a while, it became evident that they were not on the right road. "Why, Rabbi?" said Mikal. "Don't you know the way?" "It will make itself known to me in due time," answered the Baal Shem. And they took another road, but this too did not take them to their destination. "Why, Rabbi?" said Mikal. "Have you lost your way?" "It is written," the Baal Shem said calmly, "that God will fulfill the desire of them that fear him. And so, he has fulfilled your desire to have a chance to laugh at me." These words pierced young Michal to the heart, and without further arguing or analyzing, he joined the master with his whole soul. The cantor of the Baal Shem Tov. One of the Baal Shem's disciples once asked him, "How shall I make my living in the world?" "You shall be a cantor," said the master. "But I can't even sing," the other objected. "I shall bind you to the world of music," said the Tzadik. This man became a singer without peer, and far and wide they called him the cantor of the Baal Shem Tov. After many years he arrived in Lizensk in the company of his bass singer, who always went with him, and visited Rabbi Elimelech, the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. For a long time, the rabbi and his son Eleazar could not make up their minds to let these two sing with the chorus in the house of prayer on the Sabbath, for Rabbi Elimelech feared that the artistry of their singing might disturb his devotions. But Rabbi Eleazar argued that because of the holiness of the Baal Shem Tov, it would not be right to withhold the honor from the man, and so it was agreed that he should sing at the inauguration of the Sabbath. But when he began, Rabbi Elimelech noticed that the great fervor of his singing flowed into his own and threatened to drive him out of his mind, and so he had to retract his invitation. But he kept the cantor with him over the Sabbath and paid him many honors. After the conclusion of the Sabbath, the rabbi invited him to his house again and asked him to tell him about the holy Baal Shem Tov, the light of Israel. Then the eyes of the man kindled with new life, and it was clear that there was new life in his throat and in his heart as well. He began to speak, and it became manifest that now, since he had not been allowed to sing, all the fervor in his heart, which he usually poured into his song, flowed into his spoken word. He told how, in the great sequence of the songs of praise, the master never recited a verse until he had seen the angel of this verse and heard his special strain. He told of the hours in which the soul of the master rose to heaven, while his body remained behind as if dead, and that there his soul spoke with whomever it would, with Moses the faithful shepherd, and with the Messiah, and asked and was answered. He told that the master could speak to each creature on earth in its own language, and to every heavenly being in its own language. He told that, the moment the master saw an implement, he at once knew the character of the man who had made it, and what he had thought about while making it. And then the cantor arose and testified that once he and his companions had received the Torah through the mouth of the master as Israel had once received it at Mount Sinai, through the sound of thunder and trumpets, and that the voice of God was not yet silenced on earth, but endured and could still be heard. Some time after his visit in Lizensk, the cantor lay down and died. 30 days after that, and again on a Friday, the bass singer came from the bath of purification and said to his wife, "Summon the Holy Brotherhood quickly to see to my burial. For in paradise they have commissioned my cantor to sing for the inauguration of the Sabbath, and he does not want to do that without me." He lay down and died. The wrong answer. It is told, when Rabbi Wolf Kitzes took leave of his teacher before setting out for the Holy Land, the Baal Shem stretched out his second finger, touched him on the mouth, and said, "Heed your words, and see to it that you give the right reply." He refused to say anything more. The ship on which the Baal Shem's disciple had taken passage was driven from its course by a tempest and forced to land on an unknown and apparently desert island. Presently the storm died down, but the vessel had suffered damage and could not put out to sea again immediately. Some of the passengers, Rabbi Wolf among them, went ashore to have a look at the unfamiliar foreign landscape. The others turned back after a while, but he was so deep in meditation that he went on and finally came to a big house built in an old-fashioned style, which looked as if no one had ever lived in it. Only then did he remember that the ship would not wait for him. But before he could decide one way or another, a man in a linen garment appeared on the threshold. His features were age-old, his hair was white, but he bore himself erect. "Do not be afraid, Rabbi Wolf," he said. "Spend the Sabbath with us." The morning after, you will be able to resume your journey, as in a dream. Rabbi Wolf followed the old man to the bath, prayed in the company of 10 tall, majestic old men, and ate with them. The Sabbath passed as in a dream. The next morning, the age-old man accompanied him down to the shore where his ship was lying at anchor, and blessed him in parting. But just as Rabbi Wolf was hurrying to set foot on the gangplank, his host asked him, "Tell me, Rabbi Wolf, how do the Jews fare in your country? The Lord of the world does not abandon them." Rabbi Wolf replied quickly and walked on. Not until he was on the high seas did his mind clear. Then he recalled the words of his teacher and was seized with such bitter remorse that he resolved not to continue his voyage to the Holy Land, but to go home at once. He spoke to one of the crew and gathered from his reply that he was already homeward bound. When Rabbi Wolf came to the Baal Shem, his master looked at him sorrowfully but not angrily and said, "That was the wrong answer you gave our father Abraham. Day after day he asks God, 'How are my children?' And God replies, 'I do not abandon them.' If only you had told him of the sufferings of exile." The axe. Once the Baal Shem had his disciple Rabbi Wolf Kitzes learn the kavanot of blowing the ram's horn, so that, on New Year's Day, he might announce before him the order of the sounds. Rabbi Wolf learned the kavanot, but for greater security, noted everything down on a slip of paper which he hid in his bosom. This paper, however, dropped out soon after, and he never noticed it. They say that this was the work of the Baal Shem. Now when it was time to blow, Rabbi Wolf looked for his slip in vain. Then he tried to remember the kavanot, but he had forgotten everything. Tears rose to his eyes, and weeping, he announced the order of sounds quite simply, without referring to the kavanot at all. Later the Baal Shem said to him, "There are many halls in the king's palace, and intricate keys open the doors. But the axe is stronger than all of these, and no bolt can withstand it. What are all kavanot compared to one really heartfelt grief?" The word of the disciple is less than #0. 5# is greater than. On a Friday, at the hour the Tzadik examines his soul, the whole world once grew dark for the Baal Shem, and the spark of life almost died within him. That was how one of his great disciples found him. "My master and teacher," he said. His voice trembled, and he could not utter another word. But even so, he had caused new strength to flow into the Baal Shem's heart, and the flame of life grew strong within him. Near and far. A disciple asked the Baal Shem, "Why is it that one who clings to God and knows he is close to him sometimes experiences a sense of interruption and remoteness?" The Baal Shem explained, "When a father sets out to teach his little son to walk, he stands in front of him and holds his 2 hands on either side of the child, so that he cannot fall, and the boy goes toward his father between his father's hands. But the moment he is close to his father, he moves away a little and holds his hands farther apart. And he does this over and over, so that the child may learn to walk." Praying in the field. A Hasid who was traveling to Mezritch in order to spend the Day of Atonement near the Baal Shem was forced to interrupt his journey for something or other. When the stars rose, he was still a good way from the town, and, to his great grief, had to pray alone in the open field. When he arrived in Mezritch after the holiday, the Baal Shem received him with particular happiness and cordiality. "Your praying," he said, "lifted up all the prayers which were lying stored in that field." The scholars. Moshe Hayim Ephraim, a grandson of the Baal Shems, dedicated himself to study in his youth and became so great a scholar that this made him deviate somewhat from the Hasidic way of life. His grandfather, the Baal Shem, made a point of often going walking with him beyond the town, and Ephraim went with him, though with a hint of reluctance, for he begrudged the time he might have spent in studying. Once they met a man coming from another city. The Baal Shem asked him about one of his fellow citizens. "He is a great scholar," said the man. "I envy him his scholarship," said the Baal Shem. "But what am I to do? I have no time to study because I have to serve my Maker." From this hour on, Ephraim returned to the Hasidic way again with all his strength. The limits of advice. The disciples of the Baal Shem heard that a certain man had a great reputation for learning. Some of them wanted to go to him and find out what he had to teach. The master gave them permission to go. But first they asked him, "And how shall we be able to tell whether he is a true Tzadik?" The Baal Shem replied, "Ask him to advise you what to do to keep unholy thoughts from disturbing you in your prayers and studies. If he gives you advice, then you will know that he belongs to those who are of no account. For this is the service of men in the world to the very hour of their death, to struggle time after time with the extraneous, and time after time to uplift and fit it into the nature of the divine name." Writing down. A disciple secretly wrote down all the teachings he had heard from the Baal Shem. One day the Baal Shem saw a demon going through the house. In his hand was a book. The Baal Shem asked him, "What book is that you have in your hand?" "That is the book," the demon replied, "of which you are the author." End quote. Then the Baal Shem knew that someone was secretly setting down and writing what he said. He gathered all his people around him and asked, "Who of you is writing down what I teach you?" The disciple who had been taking notes said it was he, and brought the master what he had written. The Baal Shem studied it for a long time, page for page. Then he said, "In all this, there is not a single word I said. You were not listening for the sake of heaven, and so the power of evil used you for its sheath, and your ears heard what I did not say." Beside the tree of life. The Baal Shem told, "Once I went to paradise, and many people went with me. The closer I came to the garden, the more of them disappeared, and when I walked through paradise, there were only a very few left. But when I stood beside the tree of life and looked around, I seemed to be alone." The sermon. Once they asked the Baal Shem to preach after the prayer of the congregation. He began his sermon, but in the middle of it he was shaken with a fit of trembling, such as sometimes seized him while he was praying. He broke off and said, "O Lord of the world, you know that I am not speaking to increase my own reputation." Here he stopped again, and then the words rushed from his lips. "Much have I learned, and much have I been able to do, and there is no one to whom I could reveal it." And he said nothing further. Like locusts. Rabbi Michal of Zlotchov told, "Once, when we were on a journey with our teacher, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the light of the 7 days, he went into the woods to say the afternoon prayer. Suddenly we saw him strike his head against a tree and cry aloud. Later we asked him about it. He said, 'While I plunged into the Holy Spirit, I saw that in the generations which precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts, and it will be they who delay redemption, for they will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred.'" Happy is the people. Concerning the verse in the psalm, "Happy is the people that know the joyful shout. They walk, O Lord, in the light of thy countenance." The Baal Shem said, "When the people do not depend upon heroes, but are themselves versed in the joyful shout of battle, then they will walk in the light of your countenance." Simplicity. Once the Baal Shem said to his disciples, "Now that I have climbed so many rungs in the service of God, I let go of all of them and hold to the simple faith of making myself a vessel for God. It is, indeed, written, 'The simple believeth every word,' but it is also written, 'The Lord preserveth the simple.'" The hose maker. Once, in the course of a journey, the Baal Shem stopped in a little town whose name has not come down to us. One morning, before prayer, he smoked his pipe as usual and looked out of the window. He saw a man go by. He carried his prayer shawl and phylacteries in his hand and set his feet as intently and solemnly as though he were going straight to the doors of heaven. The Baal Shem asked the disciple in whose house he was staying who the man was. He was told that he was a hose maker who went to the house of prayer day after day, both summer and winter, and said his prayer even when the prescribed quorum of 10 worshippers was not complete. The Baal Shem wanted to have the man brought to him, but his host said, "That fool would not stop on his way, not if the emperor called him in person." After prayer, the Baal Shem sent someone to the man with the message that he should bring him 4 pairs of hose. Soon after, the man stood before him and displayed his wares. They were of good sheep's wool and well made. "What do you want for a pair?" asked Rabbi Israel. 1.5 gulden. "I suppose you will be satisfied with 1 gulden." "Then I should have said 1 gulden," the man replied. The Baal Shem instantly paid him what he had asked. Then he went on questioning him. "How do you spend your days?" "I ply my trade," said the man. "And how do you ply it?" "I work until I have 40 or 50 pairs of hose. Then I put them into a mold with hot water and press them until they are as they should be." "And how do you sell them?" "I don't leave my house. The merchants come to me to buy. They also bring me good wool they have bought for me, and I pay them for their pains. This time I left my house only to honor the rabbi." "And when you get up in the morning, what do you do before you go to pray?" "I make hose then too." "And what psalms do you recite?" "I say those psalms which I know by heart while I work," said the man. When the hosemaker had gone home, the Baal Shem said to the disciples who stood around him, "Today you have seen the cornerstone, which will uphold the temple until the Messiah comes." The busy man's prayer. The Baal Shem said, "Imagine a man whose business hounds him through many streets and across the marketplace the livelong day. He almost forgets that there is a maker of the world. Only when the time for the afternoon prayer comes does he remember, 'I must pray.' And then, from the bottom of his heart, he heaves a sigh of regret that he has spent his day on vain and idle matters, and he runs into a by-street and stands there and prays. God holds him dear, very dear, and his prayer pierces the firmament." The Little Whistle. A villager who year after year prayed in the Baal Shem's house of prayer in the days of awe had a son who was so dull-witted that he could not even grasp the shapes of the letters, let alone the meaning of the holy words. On the days of awe, his father did not take him to town with him because he did not understand anything. But when he was 13 and of age according to the laws of God, his father took him along on the Day of Atonement, for fear the boy might eat on the fast day simply because he did not know any better. Now the boy had a small whistle, which he always blew when he sat out in the fields to herd the sheep and the calves. He had taken this with him in the pocket of his smock, and his father had not noticed it. Hour after hour, the boy sat in the house of prayer and had nothing to say. But when the additional service commenced, he said, "Father, I have my little whistle with me. I want to sing on it." The father was greatly perturbed and told him to do no such thing, and the boy restrained himself. But when the afternoon service was begun, he said again, "Father, do let me blow my little whistle." The father became angry and said, "Where did you put it?" And when the boy told him, he laid his hand on his pocket so that the boy could not take it out. But now the closing prayer began. The boy snatched his pocket away from his father's hand, took out the whistle, and blew a loud note. All were frightened and confused. But the Baal Shem went on with the prayer, only more quickly and easily than usual. Later, he said, "The boy made things easy for me." The Court Sweeper. Once, just before New Year's, the Baal Shem came to a certain town and asked the people who read the prayers there in the days of awe. They replied that this was done by the Rav of the town. "And what is his manner of praying?" asked the Baal Shem. "On the Day of Atonement," they said, "he recites all the confessions of sin in the most cheerful tones." The Baal Shem sent for the Rav and asked him the cause of this strange procedure. The Rav answered, "The least among the servants of the king, he whose task it is to sweep the forecourt free of dirt, sings a merry song as he works, for he does what he is doing to gladden the king." Said the Baal Shem, "May my lot be with yours." In the hour of doubt. It is told, in the city of Satanov, there was a learned man, whose thinking and brooding took him deeper and deeper into the question, why what is, and why anything is at all. One Friday he stayed in the house of study after prayer to go on thinking, for he was snared in his thoughts and tried to untangle them and could not. The holy Baal Shem Tov felt this from afar, got into his carriage, and by dint of his miraculous power which made the road leap to meet him, he reached the house of study in Satanov in only an instant. There sat the learned man in his predicament. The Baal Shem said to him, You are brooding on whether God is. I am a fool and believe. The fact that there was a human being who knew of his secret stirred the doubter's heart, and it opened to the great secret. The famous miracle. A naturalist came from a great distance to see the Baal Shem and said, "My investigations show that in the course of nature, the Red Sea had to divide at the very hour the children of Israel passed through it. Now what about that famous miracle?" The Baal Shem answered, "Don't you know that God created nature? And he created it so that at the hour the children of Israel passed through the Red Sea, it had to divide. That is the great and famous miracle." Truth. The Baal Shem said, "What does it mean when people say that truth goes over all the world? It means that truth is driven out of one place after another and must wander on and on." To one who admonished. The Baal Shem said this to a Tzadik who used to preach admonishing sermons. "What do you know about admonishing? You yourself have remained unacquainted with sin all the days of your life, and you have had nothing to do with the people around you. How should you know what sinning is?" With the sinners. The Baal Shem said, "I let sinners come close to me if they are not proud. I keep the scholars and the sinless away from me if they are proud. For the sinner who knows that he is a sinner, and therefore considers himself base, God is with him, for he dwelleth with them in the midst of their uncleannesses. But concerning him who prides himself on the fact that he is unburdened by sin, God says, as we know from the Gemara, there is not enough room in the world for myself and him." Immerse. Love. The Baal Shem said to one of his disciples, "The lowest of the low you can think of is dearer to me than your only son is to you." False hospitality. It is told, in the days of the Baal Shem, a rich and hospitable man lived in a nearby city. To every poor wayfarer, he gave food and drink and money to boot. But he felt the urgent need to hear words of praise from everyone he received into his house. And if such words did not come spontaneously, he threw out a deft phrase as bait, and then a big or little praise fish was always sure to bite. Once the Baal Shem sent one of his disciples, Rabbi Wolf Kitzes, cross-country, and told him to visit that rich man in the course of his journey. He was lavishly entertained and presented with a generous gift, but gave only sparse words of thanks. Finally, his host said, "Don't you think that this is the proper way to practice hospitality?" "We shall see," answered Rabbi Wolf. And not another word could the rich man get out of him. At nightfall, the host lay down among his guests according to his custom. For before falling asleep, he liked to chat with them and hear something pleasing to his person. Just as he was dozing off, Rabbi Wolf touched him on the shoulder with his little finger. In his dream, the man thought he was called to the king and had tea with him. But suddenly, the king fell and was dead, and they accused him of poisoning him and put him in jail. A fire broke out in the jail, and he escaped and fled until he was far away. Then he became a water carrier. But that was hard work and got him a meager living. So he moved to another region where water was scarce. But there they had a law that you were not paid unless the pail was full to the brim, and to walk with a full pail and never spill a drop was a difficult matter. Once, when he was walking carefully, slow, step by step, he fell and broke both legs, and there he lay and thought of his former life, and was amazed and wept. Then Rabbi Wolf touched him on the shoulder again with his little finger, and the man woke up and said, "Take me with you to your master." The Baal Shem received the rich man with a smile. "Would you like to know where all that hospitality of yours has gone to?" he asked. "It has all gone into a dog's mouth." The man's heart awoke and turned to God, and the Baal Shem instructed him how to lift up his soul. The crowded house of prayer. Once the Baal Shem stopped on the threshold of a house of prayer and refused to go in. "I cannot go in," he said. "It is crowded with teachings and prayers from wall to wall and from floor to ceiling. How could there be room for me?" And when he saw that those around him were staring at him and did not know what he meant, he added, "The words from the lips of those whose teaching and praying does not come from the hearts lifted to heaven, cannot rise, but fill the house from wall to wall and from floor to ceiling. The jug. Once the Baal Shem said to his disciples, "Just as the strength of the root is in the leaf, so the strength of man is in every utensil he makes, and his character and behavior can be gauged from what he has made." Just then his glance fell on a fine beer jug standing in front of him. He pointed to it and continued, "Can't you see from this jug that the man who made it had no feet?" When the Baal Shem had finished speaking, one of his disciples happened to pick up the jug to set it on the bench. But the moment it stood there, it crumbled to bits. In the world of changes, in the days of the Baal Shem, there lived a man who cruelly mortified his flesh in order to attain a holy spirit. The Baal Shem once said this about him: "In the world of changes, they laugh at him. They bestow on him higher and higher rungs, and do it only to make fun of him. If he did not have me to help him, he would be lost." One small hand. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav has handed down to us these words of his great-grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov. "Alas, the world is full of enormous lights and mysteries, and man shuts them from himself with one small hand." Across the Dniester, a Tzadik told, when the master was no more than a little boy, the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, came to him and taught him the wisdom of the holy names. And because he was still so young, he wanted to find out what he could accomplish. So one day he cast his belt into the Dniester River when the current was very strong, pronounced a name, and crossed the river, walking on his belt. All his days he did penance for this, to erase the flaw from his soul, and he succeeded. For once, he had to cross the river at a time the current again ran strong, because a number of Jew haters were after him with the intent to kill. So again he cast his belt into the waters and crossed on it, but without pronouncing a holy name and with the aid of nothing but his great faith in the God of Israel. The icicle. A Tzadik told, "On a winter's day, I went to the bath with the master. It was so cold that icicles hung from the roofs. We entered, and as soon as he did the unification, the bath grew warm. He stood in the water for a very long time, until the candle began to drip and gutter. 'Rabbi,' I said, 'the candle is guttering and going out.' 'Fool,' he answered, 'take an icicle from the roof and light it. He who spoke to the oil and it leaped into flame will speak to this too, and it will kindle.' The icicle burned brightly for a good while, until I went home, and when I got home there was a little water in my hand." The creatures. It is told, once the Baal Shem was forced to inaugurate the Sabbath in an open field. A flock of sheep was at pasture nearby. When he pronounced the hymn to greet the coming Sabbath bride, the sheep rose on their hind legs and remained in this position, turned toward the master, until he had finished the prayer. For while listening to the Baal Shem's devotions, every creature assumed the original position it had held when it stood at the throne of God. The visit. The Baal Shem's disciples could always tell from his face if the 7 shepherds, or one of them, were with him. Once, at the meal of the new moon, they looked at him and knew that one of the shepherds was present. Later they asked him which of the 7 it had been. He said, "When I pronounced the benediction over the bread, I had in mind the secret of eating and plunged into it. Then Moses, our teacher, peace be with him, came to me and said, 'Hail to you, that you have in mind the very secret into which I plunged when I waited at table at the meal of Jethro, my father-in-law.'" The debate is less than #0. 5 is greater than. It is told, once the Baal Shem Tov was seated at his table with his disciples around him. Among them was Rabbi Nahan of Horodenka, whose son married a granddaughter of the Baal Shem, and with her begot the other Nahan, Rabbi Nahan of Bratslav. The Baal Shem said, "The time has come to reveal to you something of the deeper significance of the bath of immersion." He paused for a little, and then, with mighty words, built up before them the foundation and structure of meanings. When he had done, he threw back his head, and his face began to shine with that radiance which announced to his disciples that his soul was rising to the worlds above. He was utterly motionless. His disciples rose with trembling hearts and looked at him, for this was one of the times when it was vouchsafed them to see their master as he really was. Rabbi Naaman wanted to rise with the rest, but he could not. Sleep overwhelmed him. He tried to ward it off, but failed. In his dream, he came to a city where tall men were striding through the streets, on toward a great house. He went as far as the gate with them. He could go no further, for the throng of men filled the house. Now, from within, he could catch the voice of a teacher whom he could not see, though he could hear what was said quite clearly. He was speaking about the bath of immersion and revealing all its secret significance. Toward the end of his speech, it became clearer and clearer that he was presenting a teaching different from the traditional doctrine of Ari, the Holy Lion, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria. And in conclusion, this was openly stated. And now the throngs moved apart. From the door came Ari himself, pacing toward the pulpit and almost brushing Rabbi Naaman as he went. The movement of the throngs closing behind him swept Rabbi Naaman along. Suddenly he found himself standing in front of the pulpit. He looked up and recognized the face of his master, whose voice he had not recognized. And now the debate took place close before him. The lion and the Baal Shem Tov opposed each other by quoting different passages from the Holy Book of Splendor and giving different interpretations. Contradictions between one passage and another gaped and closed again, and in the end both flames leaped up in a single blaze which soared to the heart of heaven. There was no vista through which eyes could see and find a solution. Then those two resolved to ask heaven to decide. Together they performed the rite that leads to uplifting. What came to pass happened beyond the confines of time, and instantly Ari said, "The decision has been made in favor of the words of the Baal Shem Tov." At that, Naaman awoke. Before his eyes, the master bowed forward his head, which he had flung back, and said to him, "And it was you I chose to accompany me as my witness." In his image, once the Baal Shem summoned Samael, Lord of Demons, because of some important matter. The Lord of Demons roared at him, "How dare you summon me? Up to now, this has happened to me only 3 times, in the hour at the tree of knowledge, the hour of the golden calf, and the hour of the destruction of Jerusalem." The Baal Shem bade his disciples bare their foreheads, and on every forehead, Samael saw the sign of the image in which God creates man. He did what was asked of him, but before leaving, he said, "Sons of the living God, permit me to stay here a little longer and look at your foreheads." The miraculous bath. It is told, once the Baal Shem bade Rabbi Zevi, the scribe, write the verses for phylacteries and instructed him in the special attitude of the soul which befits this action. Then he said to him, "Now I shall show you the phylacteries of the Lord of the world." He took him to a lonely wood. But another one of his disciples, Rabbi Wolf Kitzes, had discovered where they were going and hid in that same wood. He heard the Baal Shem cry out, "The bath of Israel is the Lord." And suddenly he saw a bath in a place where there had been none. At the same instant, the Baal Shem said to Rabbi Zevi, "Some man is hiding here." In a moment he discovered Rabbi Wolf and told him to go away. No one has ever found out what happened in the wood after that. The effect of the mixed multitude. The Baal Shem said, "The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, prevented Moses from reaching the rung of an angel." The temptation. It is told, Sabbatai Zevi, the false Messiah, long dead, came to the Baal Shem and begged him to redeem him. Now it is well known that the work of redemption is accomplished by binding the stuff of life to the stuff of life, by binding mind to mind and soul to soul. In this way, then, the Baal Shem began to bind himself to that other, but slowly and cautiously, for he feared he might try to harm him. Once, when the Baal Shem lay asleep, Sabbatai Zevi came and tried to tempt him to become as he himself was. Then the Baal Shem hurled him away with such vigor that he fell to the very bottom of the netherworld. When the Baal Shem spoke of him, he always said, "A holy spark was within him, but Satan caught him in the snare of pride." A halt is called. 1. It is told, in the company of his daughter Odel and Rabbi Zevi, the scribe, the Baal Shem was on his way to the land of Israel to prepare for the hour of deliverance. But heaven called a halt to his journey. On the way from Istanbul to the land of Israel, the ship stopped at an unknown island. They went ashore, and when they tried to return to the ship, they lost their way and fell into the hands of robbers. Rabbi Zevi said to the Baal Shem, "Why are you silent? Just do as you usually do, and then we shall be free." But the Baal Shem replied, "I know nothing at all anymore. Everything has been taken from me. It is up to you to recall something of all you have learned from me and stir up my memory." Rabbi Zevi said, "I too know nothing at all anymore. The only thing I still remember is the alphabet." "Why are you delaying?" cried the Baal Shem. "Recite it to me." Then the scribe recited the letters of the alphabet, and he said them with the great fervor he always put into his prayers. A bell chimed. An old captain came with a troop of soldiers and freed them without saying a word. He took them aboard his ship and brought them back to Istanbul, and neither he nor any of his people said a single word. When they went ashore, it was the 7th day of Passover. The ship and the crew vanished. Then the Baal Shem knew that it was Elijah who had saved them, but he also realized that he was not to travel on. So he set out on his journey home. 2. But it is also told, during the festival of Passover, when the Baal Shem and his companions boarded a ship in Istanbul, heaven let him know that he was to go ashore again and start for home. But in his soul he refused to obey, and the ship sailed off with him. Then all the spiritual rungs he had attained were taken from him, and his teaching and his prayer was taken from him too. When he looked into a book, he no longer even understood the symbols, but in his soul he said, "What does it matter? Then I shall enter the Holy Land as a crude and ignorant fellow." But a tempest rose, and a huge wave rushed upon the ship and swept Odel, the Baal Shem's daughter, into the sea. At this moment, Satan came to him and said what he said. But he cried out, "Hear, O Israel!" He turned his back on Satan and said, "Lord of the world, I am going home." And immediately his teacher, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite, came through the air, snatched Odel out of the sea, and carried them all back to Istanbul through the clouds. Sound the great horn. A Tzadik told, the holy community had a little house outside the city, and there they met after every sermon of the Baal Shem Tov to discuss what he had said. I knew where the house was, but I did not dare go there either with them or after them because I was very young at the time. The year I was in the house of the Baal Shem Tov, on the first day of the new year, right after grace, the holy Baal Shem preached on the words of prayer. Sound the great horn for our freedom. Immediately after the sermon, he went to his room and locked the door, but his disciples went to the house outside the city. I remained behind alone. Then it occurred to me that the Messiah would come this very day, and every moment I grew more and more convinced that now he was walking along the road. Soon he would enter the city, and there would be no one there to receive him. And what I imagined seemed to me so overpoweringly true that I could do nothing but run to the disciples to tell them about it. I ran through the town, and the people wanted to stop me and question me, but I ran on until I reached the house where the others were. There I saw them all sitting around a big table, and no one uttered a word, and you could see that not one of them had the strength to utter a word. But later I learned that in his thoughts every one of them saw the Messiah coming this very hour, and I did not know what to do except sit down with them. So we sat around the big table until the stars of the second night stood in the sky. Only then the thought broke off in all of us, and we returned to the town. The third failure. It is told, when the number of renegades who followed Jacob Frank, the false Messiah, grew greater and greater, heaven revealed to the Baal Shem that their impure strength was stronger than his holy strength, and that, if he hoped to overcome them, he would have to enlist someone to help him, and that this other was to be Rabbi Moshe Pastuch, which means Rabbi Moshe, the shepherd. Without a moment's delay, the Baal Shem set out for the city to which he had been directed. When he asked for Rabbi Moshe Pastuch, it evolved that the man who bore that name was a shepherd who pastured his flock in the hills beyond the city. There he found him. The sheep were scattered over the slopes, but the shepherd, whom the Baal Shem approached unobserved, was standing over a ditch and saying to himself, "Dear Lord, how can I serve you? If you had flocks of sheep, I should pasture them for you without pay. But as it is, what can I do?" Suddenly he began to jump back and forth over the ditch. Full of fervor, he jumped and somersaulted and cried, "I am jumping for the love of God! I jump for the love of God!" Then the Baal Shem realized that the service of this shepherd was greater than his own. When the shepherd paused in his jumping, the Baal Shem went up to him and said, "I must talk with you." "I am a hired man," said the other, "and may not waste my time." "But you were just jumping back and forth over the ditch," the Baal Shem reminded him. "That is true," said the man. "I am permitted to do that because it is for the love of God." "What I have in mind for you is also for the love of God," said the Tzadik. Then the other let him talk and listened, and his soul was just as much aflame as when he had leaped the ditch. He made the Baal Shem tell him everything, beginning with the destruction of the temple, how twice before, in hours of disaster, when thousands sanctified the great name with their death, the great work had been undertaken, but that Satan had come between and prevented it, and that now the third hour had come. "Yes," cried the shepherd, "let us free the divine presence from exile." "Is there a place here where we can immerse ourselves?" asked the Baal Shem. "There is a living spring at the foot of the mountain," said the shepherd, and was already on his way down the slope. The Tzadik followed him as best he could. Down below, they both dipped down into the spring, and the Baal Shem prepared to confide to him the secret of the work in hand. In the meantime, rumor had spread in heaven that men on earth were about to hasten the hour of salvation. Heavenly powers rose up against the plan. Satan grew strong and went to work. Fire broke out in the city, and soon the alarm rang over to the hills. The shepherd ran to his sheep. "Where are you running and why?" asked the Baal Shem. The other replied, "The owners of the flocks have most likely heard that the sheep went astray, and now they will come and ask what has become of them." The Baal Shem was unable to hold him back, and he realized who it was that had put in his oar. Before the coming of the Messiah. The Baal Shem said, "Before the coming of the Messiah, there will be great abundance in the world. The Jews will get rich. They will become accustomed to running their houses in the grand style, and moderation will be cast to the winds. Then the lean years will come, want and a meager livelihood, and the world will be full of poverty. The Jews will not be able to satisfy their needs, grown beyond rhyme or reason, and then the labor which will bring forth the Messiah will begin." After the death of his wife, a Tzadik tells, the Baal Shem Tov believed that, like Elijah, he would rise up to heaven in a storm. When his wife died, he said, "I thought that a storm would sweep me up to heaven like Elijah, but now that I am only half a body, this is no longer possible." Omission is less than #0. 5 hash is greater than it is told. Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz went to the Baal Shem for Passover and saw that he was very tired. On the day before the last day of the festival, Rabbi Pinhas debated with his soul whether or not he should go to the bath of immersion. He did not go. On the last day of Passover, he felt in the midst of praying that the Baal Shem was destined to die soon because he had strained himself to the utmost against the throngs of renegades. He concentrated all his strength in prayer and gave himself wholly up to it, but noticed that he was not accomplishing anything at all. Then he was filled with deep regret that he had not gone to the bath. After prayer, the Baal Shem asked him, "Did you go to the bath yesterday?" He answered, "No." Then the Baal Shem said, "It has already come to pass, and after this there is nothing more." Of the Baal Shem's death. After Passover, the Baal Shem fell ill, but he continued to pray before the pulpit in the house of prayer as long as his strength permitted. He did not send word to those of his disciples in other towns who were held to be men whose prayers were effective through their fervor, and sent the disciples who were in Mezritch to other places. Rabbi Pinhas of Koretz was the only one who refused to leave. On the eve of the Feast of Weeks, the congregation met as every year at this time, in order to spend the night in the study of the law. The Baal Shem addressed them on the revelation on Mount Sinai. When morning came, he sent for his close friends. First he summoned 2 of them and told them to attend to his corpse and his burial. On his own body he showed them, limb by limb, how the soul wished to depart from it, and instructed them to apply what they had learned in the case of other sick persons. For these 2 belong to the Holy Brotherhood, who care for the dead and their burial. Then he bade the quorum of 10 worshippers pray with him. He asked for the prayer book and said, "I want to busy myself with God for a bit more." After the prayer, Rabbi Naaman of Horodenka went to the house of study to pray for him. The Baal Shem said, "He is shaking the gates of heaven in vain. He cannot get in at the door by which he used to enter." Later, when the servant happened to come into the room, he heard the Baal Shem say, "I give you those 2 hours," and thought that he was telling the angel of death he need not torment him 2 hours more. But Rabbi Pinhas knew better what was meant. He had 2 hours more to live, he said, and he was saying that he would make God a gift of those 2 hours. This is a true sacrifice of the soul. Then, just as every year on this day, the people from the city came to him, and he spoke words of teaching to them. Some time later he said to the disciples who stood about him, "I have no worries with regard to myself, for I know quite clearly, I am going out at one door, and I shall go in at another." And again he spoke and said, "Now I know for what I was created." He sat up in bed and spoke brief words of teaching about the pillar, by means of which the souls, after death, mount from the lower paradise to the upper paradise, to the tree of life, and expounded the verse from the book of Esther. And with that the maiden came unto the king. He also said, "I shall surely return, but not as I am now." After that he had them say the prayer, "And let the graciousness of the Lord our God be upon us," and stretched out in his bed. But several times he sat up again and whispered, as they knew he did when he shaped and directed his soul to fervor. For a while they heard nothing, and he lay there quietly. Then he bade them cover him with a sheet. But they still heard him whisper, "My God, Lord of all worlds." And then the verse of the psalm, "Let not the foot of pride come upon me." Later on, those whom he had bidden attend to his body and his burial said they had seen the Baal Shem's soul ascend as a blue flame. The river and the light. It is told, a woman who lived in a village not far from Mezritch often went there and took gifts of fish and poultry, butter and flour, to the house of the Baal Shem. Her way led across a small river. Once the river rose and flooded its banks, and when, notwithstanding, she tried to cross, she was drowned. The Baal Shem grieved for the good woman. In his grief he cursed the river, and it dried up. But the prince of the river complained of this in heaven, and there it was decided that at some time or other, for a few hours, the bed of the river should fill with water again, that the river should flood its banks, and that one of the descendants of the Baal Shem should try to cross it, and no one should help him but the Baal Shem himself. Several years after his death, his son lost his way, as he was walking by night, and suddenly found himself close to the river, which he did not recognize because of its tiding waters. He tried to cross, but was soon seized and swept away by the current. Then, above the shore, he saw a burning light, which illumined the banks and the river. He mustered all his strength, fought free of the current, and reached the shore. The burning light was the Baal Shem himself. The fiery mountain. Rabbi Zevi, the Baal Shem's son, told this, "Some time after my father's death, I saw him in the shape of a fiery mountain, which burst into countless sparks. I asked him, 'Why do you appear in a shape such as this?' He answered, 'In this shape I served God.'" On the walls, a Tzadik told, "In a dream I once had the experience of being led to the highest paradise. There I was shown the walls of the Jerusalem of above, and they were in ruins. Over these ruins heaped round about, from wall to wall, walked a man incessantly, without stopping. I asked, "Who is he?" They replied, "This is Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, who has sworn not to go from here until the temple has been rebuilt. He will be." Rabbi Nahum of Chernobyl, who in his youth was privileged to see the Baal Shem, said, "It is written, the sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. As for the Baal Shem Tov, whose merit shall be our protection, no one was before him, and no one will be after him, until the coming of the Messiah. And when the Messiah comes, he will be." And 3 times he repeated, "He will be." If Rabbi Leib, son of Sarah, the hidden Tzadik, once said to some persons who were telling about the Baal Shem, "You ask about the holy Baal Shem Tov? I tell you, if he had lived in the age of the prophets, he would have become a prophet. And if he had lived in the age of the patriarchs, he would have become an outstanding man. So that just as one says, 'God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,' one would say, 'God of Israel.'"